You don't belong here. 4 words that cost $1 billion empire everything. The crystal chandelier cast diamonds of light across the marble floor as red wine dripped from Ethan Cross's jaw onto his modest navy suit. Around him, 300 of the city's elite held up their phones, capturing his humiliation in high definition. Laughter rippled through the ballroom like champagne bubbles, light, careless, cruel. The CEO's wife had just christened him the Help in front of everyone who mattered. He didn't shout, didn't threaten. He simply wiped his face with the back of his hand, straightened his wine-stained jacket, and walked toward the exit with the kind of calm that should have terrified them. Because the man they just destroyed for entertainment owned 49% of everything they were celebrating, and he'd just decided they didn't deserve to keep it. If you want to see how one moment of cruelty can dismantle an empire, stay with me until the end. And comment below with the city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The Cromwell Grand Hotel didn't just host events. It made statements. Tonight's statement cost $6 million to stage, with ice sculptures that wouldn't melt until dawn and champagne that cost more per bottle than most people earned in a week. The ballroom stretched 3 stories high, wrapped in floor-to-ceiling windows that turned the city skyline into living wallpaper. Every surface gleamed, every guest glittered, every detail whispered the same message. We've made it. We've won. Mark Calder stood at the center of it all, surrounded by a constellation of admirers. At 52, he'd perfected the appearance of success. Silver temples, custom Italian suit, Patek Philippe catching the light every time he gestured. His smile had been focus grouped, his posture coached, his handshake calibrated to convey confidence without aggression. He'd spent 30 years building Calder Industries from a mid-sized manufacturing firm into a diversified empire, with revenue crossing $2 billion annually. Tonight was supposed to be his coronation. To new partnerships, Mark raised his glass, and 300 others rose to meet it. To unprecedented growth. To the future of Calder Industries. The crowd erupted in applause. Phones appeared, capturing the moment from every angle. Mark's wife, Lydia, materialized at his elbow in a gown that cost more than a used car, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Darling, you're glowing," she purred, loud enough for the closest clusters to hear. "Success suits you." "Success suits us," Mark corrected, pulling her close for the cameras. "None of this happens without your vision." It was a practice line, delivered with practiced sincerity. Lydia had no vision beyond spending his money and collecting social capital like trading cards, but the optics mattered. Power couples sold better than self-made men, especially in the circles they were climbing toward. "Mr. Calder," a reporter from the business section pushed forward. "Can you comment on the identity of your mystery partner? $800 million is the largest deal in company history, but we still don't know who's backing it." Mark's smile never flickered. "All in good time. Tonight is about celebration. The details will speak for themselves when we're ready to make them public. But surely, tonight," Mark repeated, firmer now, "is about celebration." The reporter retreated. Mark's assistant, Jennifer, appeared with another champagne flute and a subtle nod that meant well handled. Mark took the glass and scanned the room, mentally cataloging faces. Board members, investors, politicians, media. Everyone who needed to see him win was watching him win. Almost everyone. Across the ballroom, near the service entrance that staff used to refresh drinks and clear plates, a man in a plain navy suit stood with his back to the wall. He wasn't networking, wasn't drinking, wasn't even looking at his phone. He simply watched the crowd with the steady attention of someone reading a book he'd already finished. Ethan Cross had arrived exactly when the invitation specified, checked his coat with the attendant who didn't recognize him, and entered the ballroom through the main doors like any other guest. No one stopped him. The invitation had been legitimate, printed on heavy cardstock with his name in elegant script, Mr. Ethan Cross and guest. He'd come alone. He always came alone. At 38, Ethan had mastered invisibility, not the kind that came from hiding, but from being exactly unremarkable enough that eyes slid past him toward shinier objects. His suit came from a department store, not a tailor. His shoes were clean but not expensive. His watch told time and did nothing else. He wore his brown hair short and neat, kept his face clean-shaven, maintained the kind of average build that fit equally well in a boardroom or a grocery store. He He could have been an accountant, a teacher, a mid-level manager at any company in any city. That was the point. "Excuse me." A server paused beside him, balancing a tray of empty glasses. "Are you finding everything all right?" "I'm fine, thank you," Ethan said quietly. The server nodded and moved on. 3 separate guests had made similar assumptions throughout the evening, mistaking his position near the service area for employment. Ethan didn't correct them. There was useful information in how people treated those they perceived as beneath them. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mark's voice boomed through the sound system, "if I could have your attention for just a moment." The crowd turned as one, conversations dying like switched-off radios. Mark stood on a raised platform at the far end of the ballroom, backlit by screens displaying the Calder Industries logo. Beside him, Lydia posed with the expertise of someone who'd been photographed 10,000 times. 10 years ago, Mark began, I stood in a warehouse in Cleveland and made a promise to myself. I promised that Calder Industries would become more than a business. It would become a legacy, a testament to what vision, determination, and strategic thinking can accomplish in this great country. Applause rippled through the room. Ethan remained still. Tonight, we celebrate the fulfillment of that promise. Today, we finalized an $800 million partnership that will expand our operations into 6 new markets, create thousands of jobs, and position Calder Industries as a dominant force in manufacturing, logistics, and technology integration. This isn't just growth. This is transformation. More applause. Louder now. Phones rose like a field of stars. Mark paused for effect, letting the moment breathe. This partnership represents the future, and while I can't reveal all the details tonight, I can tell you this. We've partnered with a firm whose resources, expertise, and strategic vision align perfectly with our own. Together, we're unstoppable. The crowd erupted. Mark raised his glass again, and the room raised theirs in response. Lydia beamed beside him, one hand on his arm, claiming her share of the glory. Ethan took a slow breath and checked his watch. 9:47 p.m. The speech had started exactly on schedule. Mark Calder was nothing if not punctual when it served his interests. "Now," Mark continued as the applause faded, "I know you're all eager to hear more, but business can wait. Tonight is about enjoying this incredible moment with the people who made it possible. So please eat, drink, celebrate. You've earned it. We've all earned it." The music swelled again, something classical and expensive sounding. Conversations resumed with renewed energy, the room buzzing with speculation about the mystery partner, the expansion plans, the future value of Calder stock. Ethan watched Mark descend from the platform, immediately swallowed by a crowd of congratulations. "Can you believe this?" A woman's voice cut through the noise nearby. $800 million, that's generational wealth. "If the stock hits projections, we're looking at 30% gains minimum," her companion replied. "I'm doubling my position Monday morning." Assuming the partner's legitimate, nobody drops that kind of money without serious backing. Mark wouldn't risk his reputation on anything shaky. The man's built a bulletproof empire. Ethan turned slightly, observing the speakers without making eye contact. Both were board members. He recognized them from financial filings. Sarah Chen and Robert Portman, each holding positions significant enough to influence company direction, but not significant enough to know who actually controlled it. "Excuse me." Lydia Calder's voice sliced through the conversation like a knife through silk. "You're blocking the walkway." Ethan turned. She stood 3 feet away, champagne flute in hand, diamonds catching light at her throat and wrists and ears. Her expression carried the particular disdain of someone who'd never been told no. "I apologize," Ethan said, stepping aside. Lydia didn't move. Her eyes traveled from his department store shoes to his off-the-rack suit to his bare wrist where an expensive watch should have been. Her lip curled. "Are you staff?" she asked. "No, ma'am." "Then what are you doing lurking by the service entrance?" "Just observing," Ethan said quietly. Observing. Lydia repeated the word like it tasted bad. "This is a private event. Invitation only." "I have an invitation." "Do you?" It wasn't a question. "And who exactly are you?" "My name is Ethan Cross." The name meant nothing to her. Why would it? She'd never bothered to learn the names on the corporate documents she signed, never cared about the details of deals she claimed credit for at parties. She saw what she expected to see: a man in a cheap suit who didn't belong. "Well, Mr. Cross, I don't know how you got in here, but this event is for people who actually matter to Calder Industries. Not," she gestured vaguely at him, "whatever you are." "I understand," Ethan said. "Do you?" Lydia took a step closer, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Because what I'm seeing is someone trying to blend in with his betters. Someone who thought a department store suit would be good enough to mingle with success. Let me give you some advice." "Lydia!" Mark appeared at her shoulder, all smiles, clearly not hearing the venom in his wife's voice. "There you are. Senator Morrison wants to meet you." "Of course." Lydia's expression transformed instantly, all warmth and grace. She turned without another word, leaving Ethan standing alone near the service entrance. Mark glanced at Ethan for half a second, the way someone might glance at a lamp or a chair, registering presence without interest, and followed his wife toward the senator. Ethan remained perfectly still. He'd been insulted before, dismissed, underestimated. It was part of the design, part of the carefully constructed invisibility that let him move through the world without creating ripples. Most of the time, it didn't matter. Most of the time, people's opinions held no weight. Most of the time. He pulled out his phone and opened his email. At the top of his inbox sat a message from his CFO, sent 20 minutes ago. Final document signed. Wire transfer confirmed. Partnership officially active as of 9:30 p.m. Congratulations. Ethan typed a brief reply. Acknowledged. Stand by for further instructions. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and returned his attention to the celebration. Mark was working the room like a conductor, orchestrating interactions, making introductions, ensuring every important person felt personally acknowledged. He was good at it. Ethan had to admit that. Mark Calder had built his empire through talent, timing, and an absolute conviction in his own brilliance. That conviction was about to cost him everything. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention once more," Mark's voice rang out again. I know. I said business could wait, but I've just received word that our partnership agreement has been finalized. As of 20 minutes ago, the deal is official." The room erupted in applause and cheers. Champagne corks popped. People embraced. Mark raised both arms in victory, soaking in the adoration. "This is the beginning of something unprecedented," he continued. "And to the mystery partner watching tonight, wherever you are, thank you. Thank you for believing in our vision. Thank you for making history with us." More applause, more phones, more champagne. Ethan checked his watch again. 10:03 p.m. He started walking toward the exit, moving along the edge of the crowd, drawing no attention. He was almost to the coat check when he heard Lydia's voice again, sharp with irritation. "Told you he doesn't belong here." Ethan turned. Lydia stood near the bar with two other women, both dressed in designer gowns, both holding drinks, both watching him with identical expressions of confused disdain. "That's him," Lydia said, pointing directly at Ethan. "The one I mentioned. I don't know how he got an invitation, but he's clearly not one of us." The women murmured agreement. A small crowd was forming now, drawn by the certainty in Lydia's voice. Mark noticed the commotion and moved closer, his smile faltering for the first time that evening. "Darling, what's wrong?" "That man," Lydia gestured at Ethan. "He's been lurking all evening. I asked him who he was and he gave me some nobody name. I think he crashed the event." Mark's expression hardened. This was his night, his triumph, and someone was threatening to tarnish it with scandal. He approached Ethan with the measured steps of a man used to having problems solved by his presence alone. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave," Mark said, his voice carrying just enough authority to sound reasonable to observers. "This is a private event." "I was invited," Ethan said quietly. "I don't think so. I personally approved every name on the guest list." "Check again." "I don't need to check again. I know everyone who matters to this company, and I don't know you." Mark turned to his security chief, a square-jawed man in a black suit who'd appeared at the first sign of trouble. "Please escort this gentleman out." "That won't be necessary," Ethan said. "I'm leaving." "No." Lydia stepped forward, her face flushed with champagne and self-righteousness. "You don't just get to walk away. You crashed a private event. You lied about being invited. You owe everyone here an apology." The crowd had grown larger now, forming a loose circle around them. Phones appeared. This was becoming entertainment, a spectacle within the spectacle. Ethan could see it in their faces, the eager anticipation of someone else's humiliation, the pleasure of witnessing a gatecrasher exposed. "I didn't lie," Ethan said. "Then show us your invitation," Lydia demanded. Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out the heavy cardstock. He held it up, letting anyone close enough see the printed text. Mr. Ethan Cross and guest. Mark's eyes narrowed. "That's impossible. I didn't authorize—" "Check your list," Ethan said again. Mark pulled out his phone, scrolling quickly through what must have been a digital copy of the guest list. His frown deepened. "There's no Ethan Cross on here." There should be. The invitation came from your office." "My office doesn't make mistakes." "Apparently it does." The crowd murmured. This was getting interesting. Mark's face was reddening, his perfect composure cracking. Lydia looked triumphant, vindicated in her suspicion. "I don't care what that piece of paper says," Mark said, his voice rising. "You weren't invited. You don't belong here. And you're embarrassing yourself by insisting otherwise." Ethan looked at him for a long moment. Looked at Lydia. Looked at the crowd of 300 successful, powerful people who'd gathered to watch a man in a cheap suit get humiliated. "I apologize for the confusion," Ethan said quietly. "I'll leave." He turned toward the exit. "Wait," Lydia said. He stopped. She walked toward him, her heels clicking on the marble floor, champagne still in hand. When she was close enough that the cameras would catch every detail, she smiled. "Before you go," she said, "I think you need to understand something." Then she threw her champagne in his face. The red wine hit Ethan full on, splashing across his face, soaking into his suit, dripping onto the pristine marble floor. The crowd gasped, some in shock, some in delight. Phones rose higher, capturing every angle. Lydia's smile widened. "That's for wasting our time. That's for thinking you could pretend to be someone you're not. That's for not knowing your place." Ethan stood perfectly still. Wine dripped from his jaw. His suit was ruined. 300 people watched him stand there, humiliated and soaking, the physical embodiment of someone who'd reached too far and been slapped down for the presumption. He didn't wipe his face, didn't react. He simply looked at Lydia, then at Mark, then at the crowd. "Thank you for the evening," he said quietly. Then he walked toward the exit, leaving a trail of red drops behind him. The crowd parted. No one spoke. The only sound was his footsteps and the click of camera phones capturing his departure. He reached the coat check, received his jacket from an attendant who couldn't meet his eyes, and walked out into the cool night air. Behind him, the party resumed. Laughter erupted. People crowded around Lydia, congratulating her on handling the situation. Mark returned to his platform, making jokes about gatekeepers and security, turning the humiliation into another moment of triumph. Ethan walked 3 blocks before stopping under a streetlight. He pulled out his phone, wine still dripping from his hair, and opened his contacts. He scrolled to a name marked only as Reynolds and pressed call. The phone rang twice. "Ethan?" A woman's voice, sharp and professional. "Is everything all right?" "Pull the offer," Ethan said. Silence. "Say that again?" "The Calder deal. Pull our entire position. Withdraw the $800 million. Terminate the partnership immediately." "Ethan, we just finalized 30 minutes ago. There are contracts, press releases scheduled, regulatory filings." "I'm aware. Pull it anyway." "Can I ask why?" "Personal reasons." More silence. Then, "This is going to create significant disruption. Market impact, legal complications, PR disaster." "I understand." "The optics alone." "Jennifer." Ethan's voice remained quiet, but something in it made the CFO stop talking. "Pull the offer. Now. I'll handle the consequences." A long breath on the other end. "All right. I'll need 20 minutes to reach everyone who needs to be reached. The withdrawal will be official by 10:30. "Thank you." "Ethan, are you sure about this?" "Completely." He ended the call and stood under the streetlight, wine drying on his face, watching the distant glow of the Cromwell Grand Hotel. Inside that building, Mark Calder was celebrating the biggest deal of his career, a partnership that would transform his company into an industry titan, a legacy that would outlast him. For another 15 minutes. Ethan pulled out a handkerchief and finally wiped his face. The wine had ruined his suit, but suits could be replaced. He walked to the curb and hailed a taxi, giving the driver an address in a quieter part of the city. "Rough night?" the driver asked, eyeing the stained suit in the rearview mirror. "You could say that," Ethan replied. The taxi merged into traffic. Through the back window, Ethan watched the Cromwell Grand Hotel disappear into the cityscape. In 17 minutes, Jennifer Reynolds would execute his instructions. Contracts would be voided. Wire transfers would be reversed. $800 million would vanish from Calder Industries' future like it had never existed. And somewhere in that ballroom, surrounded by admirers and cameras and champagne, Mark Calder would receive a phone call that would end everything he'd spent tonight celebrating. Ethan settled back in the seat, closed his eyes, and waited. Inside the Cromwell Grand, the celebration had reached its peak. The orchestra played louder. The champagne flowed faster. Mark Calder stood at the center of it all, basking in the attention, already mentally drafting the interviews he'd give, the features that would be written, the legacy being cemented with every passing minute. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He ignored it. Tonight was about being present, about savoring the triumph. Business could wait. It vibrated again. Mark smiled apologetically at the investor he was talking to and stepped away, pulling out his phone. The screen showed 5 missed calls from his head of legal, 3 from his CFO, 2 from his head of operations. All in the last 4 minutes. His smile faltered. He stepped into a quiet corridor and called his head of legal. "Mark," the man's voice was tight with panic, "we have a serious problem." "What kind of problem?" "The partnership. It's gone." Mark laughed. "What are you talking about? We just announced—" "I'm talking about the partner pulling out, completely. They've withdrawn their entire position, terminated the agreement, reversed the wire transfer. As of 3 minutes ago, the deal no longer exists." The corridor seemed to tilt. Mark grabbed the wall for support. "That's impossible. We have contracts, signed agreements. You can't just—" "They can. There's a termination clause for material concerns. They invoked it." "Material concerns? What material concerns? The deal was perfect. Everything was in order." "I don't know their reasoning. I just know it's legal, it's binding, and it's done. The partnership is over." Mark's mind raced. This had to be a mistake, a misunderstanding, a technical glitch that could be fixed with a phone call. "Who do I talk to? Give me a name. Give me the partner's direct line." "That's the other problem," his legal counsel said slowly. "We don't have one. The deal was structured through intermediaries. We never had direct contact with the primary partner." "Then get me the intermediary." "I'm trying, but Mark—" The lawyer paused. "There's something else you should know." "What?" "The partner's name. We finally got it from the filings that just came through. The primary shareholder, the one who owned 49% of the partnership entity, the one who just terminated everything." "Who?" "Ethan Cross." Mark stood frozen in the corridor, phone pressed to his ear, the name echoing in his mind. Ethan Cross. The man in the cheap suit. The nobody who didn't belong. The gatecrasher Lydia had humiliated in front of everyone. "How long have we known this name?" Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The filing shows the ownership structure was registered 6 months ago. But tonight was the first time any of us saw it. The layers of holding companies kept everything obscured until—" Mark ended the call. He stood in the corridor alone with the distant sound of celebration and felt his entire world beginning to crack. His phone rang again, the CFO this time. "Mark, we need to talk. The markets are going to open in 12 hours and we have to decide how to handle this. The press releases are scheduled. The investor calls are lined up. But if word gets out that the deal fell through—" "How?" Mark interrupted. "How did this happen?" "I don't know, but we need to focus on damage control. If we can spin this as a mutual parting, if we can control the narrative before—" His name was on the guest list. Mark wasn't talking to the CFO anymore. He was talking to himself, pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. Ethan Cross. We sent him an invitation because he was part of the deal, because he mattered. "Mark, I need you to focus." "We threw wine on our primary partner." Silence. "My wife humiliated him in front of 300 people. in front of cameras, in front of everyone who matters in this city. Oh no. And I told security to throw him out. Mark, this was his test, Mark said quietly. He wanted to see how we'd treat him, and we failed. He ended the call and walked back toward the ballroom. Through the double doors, he could see Lydia holding court, telling the story of the gatecrasher to a delighted audience. He could see phones still out, the videos probably already uploading to social media. He could see his empire, built over 30 years, beginning to collapse in real time. His phone vibrated with new messages, board members, investors, media outlets, all asking the same questions. Is it true? Did the deal fall through? What happened? Mark looked at the celebration he'd staged, the $6 million party that was supposed to crown his legacy, and realized he was watching his own funeral. He pulled out his phone one more time and searched for Ethan Cross. No social media presence, no public profile. Just a few mentions in obscure business filings. Always listed as a minority shareholder in holding companies nobody paid attention to. A ghost who owned everything and wanted credit for nothing. Until tonight. Mark walked slowly back into the ballroom. The music still played, the champagne still flowed. Nobody knew yet. In this moment, frozen in time, he was still the triumphant CEO who'd just closed the biggest deal of his career. He had maybe an hour before it all came apart. He found Lydia by the ice sculpture, laughing with the senator's wife, completely oblivious. He touched her elbow gently. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "Right now." Something in his voice made her smile fade. She excused herself and followed him to the corridor, away from the cameras, away from the crowd. "What's wrong?" "The deal's gone," Mark said flatly. "The partner pulled out, terminated everything. The $800 million is gone." Lydia stared at him. "That's not funny. Do I look like I'm joking?" Her face paled. "But you just announced—" "Everyone knows. How can they just—" "The man you threw wine on," Mark said. "The one you humiliated. The one I tried to have thrown out." "What about him?" "He owned the partnership, 49%, $800 million, and we treated him like a gatecrasher." Lydia's mouth opened, closed. No sound came out. "The videos are already online," Mark continued. "Everyone saw what we did, and in about an hour everyone's going to know who he was, who we just destroyed our company over." "No." Lydia shook her head. "That can't be right. He was nobody. He dressed like nobody. He acted like someone testing us," Mark finished. "Like someone seeing what kind of people we really are when we think nobody's watching who matters." They stood in the corridor, the celebration continuing behind them, and understood with perfect clarity that their world had just ended. Not with a bang, not with with a glass of thrown wine. At 10:47 p.m., the first articles appeared online. By 11:15, the videos had been viewed 50,000 times. By midnight, the trending hashtag was #CromwellGate. By 1 a.m., every major news outlet was covering the story. CEO humiliates secret business partner at gala, loses $800 million deal. And somewhere in a quiet apartment in a quiet neighborhood, Ethan Cross sat in the dark, watching his phone light up with notifications he had no intention of answering. He'd given them every chance. They'd chosen humiliation. Now they'd learn what that choice cost. The sun rose over a city that had spent the night tearing apart Mark Calder's reputation one tweet at a time. By 6 a.m., the video had been viewed 8 million times across platforms. By 7, financial analysts were appearing on morning shows to discuss the implications. By 8, Calder Industries stock had dropped 19% in pre-market trading, and the opening bell was still 90 minutes away. Mark hadn't slept. He sat in his home office, still wearing yesterday's tuxedo minus the jacket, watching his phone cycle through an endless stream of disaster. Missed calls from board members, urgent emails from investors, text messages from colleagues who'd been friends yesterday and were suddenly unavailable today. The CFO had sent a preliminary damage assessment at 4 a.m. that Mark couldn't bring himself to open because the subject line alone, "immediate crisis response required," made his chest tight. Lydia hadn't spoken to him since 2 a.m. when she'd finally stopped crying and locked herself in the guest bedroom. The sound of her sobs had echoed through their 12,000-square-foot house like an accusation. His desk phone rang. Mark stared at it for 3 rings before answering. Mr. Calder. His head of public relations, Amanda Birch, sounded like she'd been awake for days. We need to make a statement. The silence is making everything worse. What do you want me to say? Mark's voice came out rough, damaged. I'm sorry I humiliated my business partner at a gala because I thought he was too poor to matter. That's actually not far off from what I drafted, obviously with more polish. Amanda. Mark, listen to me. Right now, the narrative is that you're an elitist who destroyed your own company through arrogance. That's a disaster, but it's recoverable if we act fast. We issue a statement acknowledging the mistake, taking full responsibility, expressing genuine remorse. We offer to make amends. We commit to doing better. And you think that fixes this? I think it stops the bleeding. Maybe. If we're lucky and if Ethan Cross doesn't twist the knife. Mark closed his eyes. Have we reached out to him? Every avenue we have. Email, phone, intermediaries, nothing. He's gone completely dark. So he's just going to let us burn. Or he's waiting to see what we do next. Mark, you need to understand something. The internet has already decided you're the villain. Every comment, every article, every opinion piece is about how this proves that successful people are out of touch, that the rich don't care about regular people, that you got exactly what you deserved. If you want any chance of changing that narrative, you need to humanize yourself immediately. By apologizing to a man who just cost me $800 million. By apologizing to a man you humiliated in front of the world, Amanda corrected. The money is secondary to the optics. People don't care about corporate deals. They care about watching someone powerful get cut down for being cruel. Mark pressed his palm against his forehead. His head throbbed. His mouth tasted like old champagne and regret. Draft the statement. Send it to me in an hour. Mark, we don't have an hour. The stock market opens at 9:30. We need something out before then. Then send it in 30 minutes. He ended the call and stood up, his knees cracking. Through the windows of his office, he could see the manicured lawn, the infinity pool, the city skyline in the distance. He'd bought this house 7 years ago as a symbol of everything he'd achieved. Now it felt like a museum dedicated to his own hubris. His phone buzzed with a new notification. Another news alert. Who is Ethan Cross, the mysterious investor behind the Cromwell Gala scandal? Mark clicked through to an article that was clearly written in haste, full of speculation and breadcrumbs, but very few facts. Ethan Cross, 38, appears to have built a quiet empire through strategic minority stakes in dozens of companies across multiple industries. Unlike most investors of his apparent wealth, Cross maintains no public profile, conducts no press interviews, and avoids any attention that might reveal the extent of his holdings. Industry sources estimate his net worth in the billions, though exact figures remain unknown. He's a ghost, said one private equity executive who spoke on condition of anonymity. Everyone in the business knows someone who's taken his money, but nobody knows anything about him personally. He funds deals, collects returns, and disappears. Until last night, most people had never even heard his name. Mark read the article twice, searching for anything he could use, any leverage or vulnerability. He found nothing. Ethan Cross was a cipher, a man who'd built enormous wealth while remaining completely invisible. The only public information anyone could find was what appeared in corporate filings, and even that was buried under layers of holding companies and legal structures that obscured more than they revealed. He was exactly the kind of person Mark should have been careful around. Instead, he'd let Lydia throw wine in the man's face while 300 people filmed it. Mark's phone rang again. The board chairman this time. Richard, Mark answered, forcing steadiness into his voice. I know we need to talk. We're calling an emergency meeting, Richard Thornton interrupted. His voice carried the flat certainty of a judge reading a sentence. Conference call at 9 a.m., full board attendance mandatory. Of course, I'll have a statement prepared by then. Mark, I'm going to be direct with you. There are members of the board who want you gone. Today, right now. The words hit like a physical blow. Mark sat down hard in his leather chair. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. You've created the biggest PR disaster in company history. You've cost us an $800 million deal. You've tanked our stock value. And the video of you and Lydia humiliating someone is being shared by millions of people who now see Calder Industries as everything wrong with corporate America. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake, but a mistake you made because you judged a man's worth by his suit instead of doing basic due diligence. That's not a mistake, Mark. That's a fundamental failure of character and judgment. Richard, I've built this company from nothing, 30 years of work. You can't erase that because of one bad night. Watch me. Richard's voice softened slightly. Look, I'm not saying you're definitely out. I'm saying the conversation is happening. You have until 9 a.m. to convince the board that you can fix this. And Mark, you better have a plan that's better than a press release and an apology. The line went dead. Mark sat in his chair, watching the sunrise turn his office windows gold, and felt the first real edge of panic cutting through the numbness. He'd been humiliated last night. He'd lost a massive deal. His reputation was in tatters. But until this moment, until Richard's call, some part of him had believed this was fixable. Damage control, crisis management, weather the storm and rebuild. Now he understood this wasn't a storm. This was an execution. The intercom on his desk crackled. "Mr. Calder?" His housekeeper's voice, tentative. "There are reporters at the front gate. Quite a few of them." Mark walked to the window and looked down at the street. 3 news vans, a cluster of photographers, reporters doing stand-ups with his house in the background. He watched one camera operator zoom in on his office window. Mark stepped back instinctively. "Don't answer the door," he said into the intercom. "Don't talk to anyone." "Yes, sir." His email dinged with Amanda's draft statement. Mark opened it, reading words that were technically accurate but felt completely inadequate. "Last night, I made a grave error in judgment. I failed to treat someone with the dignity and respect that every person deserves, regardless of how they present themselves or what I assumed about their status. I deeply regret my actions and the actions of my family, and I take full responsibility for the consequences. I have reached out to Mr. Cross privately to express my sincere apologies, and I hope to have the opportunity to make amends. This incident has forced me to reflect seriously on my own biases and blind spots, and I commit to doing better. Calder Industries was built on principles of excellence, integrity, and respect. Last night, I failed to live up to those principles. I'm sorry." Mark read it 3 times. The words were right. The tone was right. Everything Amanda had crafted was exactly what the situation required, and yet Mark couldn't shake the feeling that it wouldn't matter. The internet had already made up its mind. The board was already discussing his removal. Ethan Cross was already gone. Still, he had to try. Mark forwarded the statement to Richard with a note. "Issuing this within the hour. We'll address further steps on the 9 a.m. call." Then he stood, straightened his wrinkled tuxedo shirt, and went to find Lydia. She was sitting in the breakfast nook overlooking the pool, still in last night's gown, mascara streaked down her face. A cup of coffee sat untouched in front of her. She looked up when Mark entered, and he saw something he'd never seen in 15 years of marriage. Genuine fear. "They're going to destroy us," she whispered. Mark sat across from her. "We destroyed ourselves." "He should have said something. He should have told us who he was." "Why?" "We sent him an invitation. We knew his name. We just didn't care enough to learn what it meant." Lydia's hand shook as she reached for the coffee. "I've gotten 200 messages. Friends, colleagues, people I've known for years. Half are asking if I'm okay. The other half are telling me I'm a disgrace to my family name. The board is meeting in 2 hours to discuss removing me." Her eyes widened. "They can't." "They can. And they probably will." Mark leaned back in his chair, exhaustion settling into his bones. "I'm issuing an apology. It won't be enough, but it's all we can do." "An apology to him? To that?" Lydia stopped herself, apparently realizing how any description she gave would only make things worse. "Yes," Mark said quietly. "An apology to Ethan Cross, the man we humiliated because we thought we were better than him. We are better than him." The words came out reflexively, desperately, a child insisting the monster under the bed isn't real. Mark looked at his wife, really looked at her, and saw clearly what he'd been too busy to notice before. The brittle entitlement, the casual cruelty, the absolute certainty that her wealth and status made her superior to anyone with less. It had always been there. He just never had a reason to examine it. No, he said softly. We're not. Lydia stared at him. You're really going to blame me for this? I'm not the one who lost $800 million. You threw wine in his face because he was lurking like a creep, because he didn't belong there. He belonged there more than anyone. We just couldn't see it. Mark stood up. Amanda is issuing a statement. You should read it. You should probably add your own apology. I'm not apologizing for defending our event from a gatecrasher. He wasn't a gatecrasher, Lydia. He was our partner, and you humiliated him in front of the world. Because he looked poor. The words burst out of her, raw and honest in a way she probably didn't intend. That's what this is really about, isn't it? I'm being punished for having standards. Mark felt something cold settle in his chest. I have a board call in 2 hours. I'd suggest you spend that time figuring out if you want to be part of fixing this or if you want to keep justifying it. He left her sitting there and went back to his office. The reporters outside had multiplied. Mark counted 5 news vans now, a small crowd of cameras and boom mics all pointed at his fortress of a house like weapons. At 8:45 a.m., Amanda posted the statement on Calder Industries' official social media accounts. Mark watched the responses roll in, a torrent of comments that were roughly 70% too little too late and 30% good first step. The stock price, which had been hovering at minus 22%, dropped another 3 points. At exactly 9 o'clock a.m., Mark joined the board conference call. 13 voices came through the speaker, each tagged with a name on his screen. Richard Thornton started talking before Mark could say hello. Gentlemen, ladies, we all know why we're here. We have a crisis that threatens the fundamental integrity and value of this company. I'm going to let Mark speak first, then we'll open the floor for discussion. Mark cleared his throat. Thank you, Richard. By now you've all seen the statement I issued. I want to be clear that this is just the beginning of our response. I take full responsibility for what happened last night. My judgment failed catastrophically, and I understand the consequences that follow from that. Do you? The voice belonged to Elizabeth Warren, the board's longest-serving member and its most skeptical. Because from where I'm sitting, Mark, you cost us a transformational partnership because you couldn't be bothered to know who your partners actually were. That's accurate, Mark said quietly, and unforgivable. So what's your plan? How do you fix this? I'm reaching out to Mr. Cross through every channel available. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make amends and potentially salvage some kind of working relationship. He's not responding to anyone, another board member jumped in, Thomas Reed, head of the audit committee. We've had our people try. He's shut us out completely. Then I'll try harder. That's not a plan, Elizabeth said flatly. That's a hope. The market opens in 23 minutes. Our stock is down 25%. We have investors demanding answers, partners questioning their relationships with us, and a PR nightmare that's getting worse by the hour. What is your actual concrete plan? Mark took a breath. We focus on damage control. We demonstrate through actions, not just words, that this company values integrity over appearance. We review our policies, our culture, our hiring practices. We make visible changes that show we learned from this. Corporate reform theater, someone muttered. Mark couldn't tell who. Mark, Richard's voice cut through. I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need a direct answer. Do you believe you're still the right person to lead this company? The question hung in the air. Mark could hear his own heartbeat in the silence. Yes, he said finally. I believe I can fix this. I believe I owe it to everyone who built this company with me to try. That's not what I asked. I asked if you're the right person, not if you want to try. Mark closed his eyes. I don't know. More silence. Then Elizabeth spoke again, her voice harder than before. I motion that we appoint an interim CEO while Mark takes a leave of absence to address this crisis. We need leadership that isn't compromised by this scandal. Second, Thomas said immediately. Wait, Mark started. Discussion? Richard asked the group. I agree with Elizabeth. Another voice, younger. David Chen, newest board member. I've spent the morning talking to our institutional investors. 3 have already indicated they'll dump their positions if Mark stays on. We can't afford that kind of exodus. This is premature, Mark said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Give me a week. Let me show you what I can do." "Mark," Richard sounded almost sympathetic, "the story isn't going to change in a week. You humiliated someone on camera. That video is permanent. Every time someone searches your name or this company's name, they're going to see you calling security on your own business partner. Then let me own it. Let me be the one who fixes it." "You can't fix it," Elizabeth said bluntly. "That's the reality you need to accept. This isn't a PR problem or a strategic challenge. This is a fundamental loss of trust and credibility, and you're the face of that loss. The only way this company moves forward is if you step aside." "I'm not resigning." "Then you're fired." Elizabeth's voice was cold, final. "I'm moving to terminate Mark Calder's position as CEO effective immediately." "Second?" "Second," David Chen said. Mark felt the room tilt. This was actually happening. 30 years of work, ending in a conference call because he'd been too arrogant to look past a cheap suit. "All in favor?" Richard asked quietly. 7 voices said aye. Mark watched the screen, seeing names light up one after another, board members he'd worked with for years, people he'd thought were friends, all voting to end him. Opposed? 4 voices said nay, not enough, not even close. "Mark," Richard's voice was gentle now, the executioner showing mercy after the blade falls. "I'm sorry. The board has voted to terminate your position as CEO of Calder Industries, effective immediately. We're appointing Jennifer Reynolds as interim CEO while we conduct a search for permanent leadership." Jennifer Reynolds, his CFO, the woman who'd executed Ethan Cross's order to pull the deal. She'd known before anyone else that this was coming, and she'd positioned herself perfectly to take his place. "I see," Mark said quietly. "You'll retain your position on the board, and you'll receive the severance package outlined in your contract. We appreciate everything you've built here, but the company needs new leadership." "I understand. The press release goes out in 30 minutes. I'd suggest you prepare your own statement." "Of course." "And Mark, I genuinely am sorry, but you did this to yourself." The call ended. Mark sat alone in his office, staring at the phone, watching the news vans multiply outside his house. Fired. After 3 decades, fired on a conference call because he'd been too proud to be kind. His phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. "I heard. I'm so sorry. Do you want me to draft a resignation statement, or are we fighting this?" Mark typed back. "No fight. Draft the statement. Make it dignified." He stood and walked to the window. The morning sun was bright, the sky cloudless. Perfect weather for a perfect disaster. Somewhere in this city, Ethan Cross was watching all of this unfold, seeing the consequences of one moment of casual cruelty ripple outward like waves from a dropped stone. Mark wondered if the man felt satisfied, if this was justice or revenge or simply business. He wondered if he'd ever get the chance to ask. His office door opened. Lydia stood in the doorway, her face carefully composed now, makeup reapplied. She'd changed into a designer dress, armor against the world. "Richard called me," she said. "Is it true?" "Yes." "They can't do this. You built everything. You can fight it." "I'm not fighting it." "Mark, it's over, Lydia. We lost. We lost because we were cruel to someone who didn't deserve it, and the whole world watched it happen." He turned to face her. "I'm fired. The company I built is going to someone else, and I have no one to blame but myself." Lydia's composure cracked. "So that's it? We just give up?" "What do you want me to do? The board voted. The decision is made. The best thing I can do now is accept it with whatever dignity I have left." "This is because of him." Lydia's voice turned sharp with anger. "That man, Ethan Cross, he's destroyed our lives." "No." Mark said it firmly, finally. "We destroyed our own lives." He just held up a mirror. He walked past her, down the stairs, through the house he could no longer afford, and out to the pool deck. The reporters couldn't see him here, couldn't capture this moment. He stood in the sun, looking at the water, and let himself feel the full weight of what he'd lost. Not just the job, not just the money, but the belief that he'd earned his position through merit, that his success meant something deeper than luck and privilege. Last night, in front of 300 witnesses, He'd revealed exactly who he was when he thought no one important was watching. And Ethan Cross had made sure everyone saw it. Mark's phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him press accept. Hello? Mr. Calder. The voice was quiet, familiar. This is Ethan Cross. Mark's breath caught. Mr. Cross, I've been trying to reach you. I know. I want to apologize. What happened last night was... I don't want your apology, Ethan interrupted gently. I'm calling because I thought you deserved to hear something directly from me. All right. You asked yourself the wrong question last night. When I walked into your gala, when I stood in that ballroom wearing a cheap suit and no expensive watch, you looked at me and asked, does this person belong here? That was your mistake. I realize that now. The right question is, would I treat this person with dignity regardless of whether they belong here? That's the question that reveals character. You failed it. Your wife failed it. And 300 of your closest associates watched you fail it and cheered. Mark said nothing. What could he possibly say? I didn't pull the deal because you didn't recognize me, Ethan continued. I pulled it because the moment you thought I was beneath you, you treated me like I was disposable. That tells me everything I need to know about how you treat employees, customers, partners when you thought no one was watching, and I don't do business with people like that. I understand. Do you? Because I'm not sure you do. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry you lost your job and your reputation. But are you actually sorry you were cruel to someone you thought didn't matter? Mark thought about it, really thought about it. The wine dripping down Ethan's face, the laughter from the crowd, the satisfaction he'd felt watching Lydia put someone in their place. Yes, he said quietly. I'm sorry for that too. I'm sorry for who I revealed myself to be. Was silence on the other end. Then, that's more honest than I expected. Does it change anything? No, but it's a start. Ethan paused. Mr. Calder, you're going to spend a very long time living with what you did last night. People are going to recognize you. They're going to remember. Every job interview, every social gathering, every time you meet someone new, there's going to be a moment where they realize you're the man from the video. That's your consequence. I know. But here's what I want you to understand. This doesn't have to define you forever. What defines you is what you do next. How you treat people when you have nothing. How you rebuild when everyone's watching you fail. That's the measure of character that actually matters. Mark felt something loosen in his chest. Why are you telling me this? Because I've been where you are. Not exactly, but close enough. I know what it's like to lose everything and have to rebuild from humiliation. The question isn't whether you deserve a second chance. The question is whether you're capable of earning one. And you think I am? I think you could be, if you're willing to do the work. The line went quiet again. Mark could hear birds in the background on Ethan's end, the distant sound of traffic. Normal life, continuing for everyone who hadn't destroyed themselves on camera. Thank you for calling, Mark said finally. I don't deserve your grace, but I appreciate it anyway. You're welcome. Ethan's voice softened slightly. Good luck, Mr. Calder. You're going to need it. The call ended. Mark stood by his pool, holding his phone, feeling the first genuine spark of something that might eventually become hope. He'd lost everything. His job, his reputation, his future. But Ethan Cross, the man he'd humiliated, had just given him something he didn't expect and definitely didn't deserve. A roadmap back. Mark looked at his house, his material proof of success that meant nothing now, and made a decision. He walked inside, found Lydia in the living room scrolling through her phone with tears streaming down her face, and sat beside her. We need to sell the house, he said quietly. She looked up, shocked. What? This house, the cars, everything we bought to prove we'd made it. We're selling it. We're downsizing. We're rebuilding from something real this time. Mark, you're in shock. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking clearly for the first time in years. He took her hand. We did this to ourselves, both of us. And the only way forward is to stop pretending we're owed anything and start earning our way back. Lydia pulled her hand away. I'm not giving up my life because you made a mistake. We made a mistake, together. And we're going to fix it together, or we're going to fail separately. Your choice. He stood and walked back to his office, leaving her with that ultimatum. Outside, the reporters had grown to a small crowd. Mark's phone buzzed with another statement from Amanda, time-stamped for release in 15 minutes. He read it, approved it, and opened a new document. Then he started writing his own statement, not for the press, not for the board, just for himself. A record of what he was thinking in this moment, what he was feeling, what he understood now that he'd been too blind to see before. I spent 30 years building an empire, he wrote, and I destroyed it in 30 seconds because I forgot the most basic principle of being human. Treat everyone with dignity, regardless of who they are or what they can do for you. That's not a business lesson. That's a life lesson. And I failed it spectacularly. I don't know what comes next. I don't know if I can rebuild or if I'll ever be trusted again. But I know I have to try, not because I deserve another chance, but because the alternative is accepting that I'm exactly the person that video shows me to be. I'm not that person. Or at least I don't want to be. That has to be enough to start. Mark saved the document, closed his laptop, and walked downstairs. The reporters were still outside. His phone was still exploding with notifications. The internet was still tearing him apart. But for the first time since last night, Mark Calder felt like he might eventually be okay. Not today. Not tomorrow. But someday, if he earned it, he might become the person he should have been all along. The person who would have recognized Ethan Cross's worth regardless of his suit. The person who would have treated him with dignity even if he'd been nobody. That person was worth becoming, even if it cost him everything to get there. 3 weeks later, Mark stood in the living room of a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood he'd never visited when he lived in the mansion. The space was smaller than his old closet, with laminate floors instead of marble and windows that looked out at another building instead of a city skyline. The movers had just left, and cardboard boxes covered every surface like monuments to everything he'd lost. Lydia hadn't come with him. She'd filed for divorce on day 5, retained the most aggressive attorney in the city, and moved into her mother's estate in Connecticut. The legal papers had been delivered to Mark's temporary hotel room with a note that said only, "I'm not rebuilding, I'm surviving. There's a difference." He'd signed them without argument. Some partnerships couldn't survive the mirror being held up. Mark's phone buzzed with another news alert. He'd stopped reading them after the first week, but this one caught his eye. Ethan Cross emerges. Rare interview with the investor who brought down Calder Industries. His hand hesitated over the notification, then clicked through. The article featured a single photo of Ethan, taken at what looked like a charity event. He wore the same kind of unremarkable suit, the same calm expression, standing slightly apart from the crowd as if he'd wandered into the frame by accident. The interview was brief, conducted via email, and characteristically measured. "I don't believe in public humiliation as entertainment," Ethan had written, "but I do believe in accountability. What happened at the Cromwell Grand wasn't about revenge. It was about revealing character that was always there, just usually hidden from public view. Mr. Calder and his wife made choices about how to treat someone they perceived as beneath them. Those choices had consequences. That's not cruelty. That's just cause and effect." The journalist had asked if Ethan would ever consider working with Calder Industries again. "That depends entirely on whether the culture changes. I don't invest in companies. I invest in the people who run them. And right now, Calder Industries is learning what it means to operate without the protection of a powerful CEO who thought his status made him immune to consequences. If they emerge from this stronger and more ethical, I'd consider it. If they don't, someone else will take their place." Mark read the response 3 times, searching for hidden meanings, for any indication of what Ethan actually thought. He found only the same quiet certainty that had characterized their phone call. No anger, no gloating, just a man stating facts and letting others draw their own conclusions. A knock at the door interrupted his reading. Mark opened it to find Amanda Birch standing in the hallway, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a tablet tucked under her arm. "I brought sustenance," she said, holding up the cups, "and a reality check. I'm not sure I can handle both." "Too bad." Amanda pushed past him into the apartment, surveying the boxes with a professional eye. "You're going to need to handle a lot worse than coffee and honesty if you want to rebuild." Mark closed the door and took one of the cups. "I thought you'd have moved on to other clients by now." I did. You're not paying me anymore, remember? I'm here as a friend. Amanda set her tablet on the kitchen counter and turned to face him. Also, as someone who's watched your situation very carefully for the past 3 weeks and has some thoughts. I'm listening. The story is shifting, slowly, but it's shifting. The initial outrage has died down. People are starting to ask more nuanced questions about wealth, about how we judge people, about second chances. You're not the villain anymore. You're the cautionary tale. That's not much better. It's everything, Amanda said firmly. Villains stay villains. Cautionary tales can become redemption stories if the protagonist does the work. The question is whether you're willing to do that work. Mark looked around the apartment, at the physical evidence of how far he'd fallen. What kind of work are we talking about? Public work. Visible work. The kind that shows you learned something instead of just surviving something. Amanda pulled up her tablet, scrolling through what looked like a presentation. I've been talking to some people. Nonprofit organizations, community groups, educational programs, places that need expertise and leadership but can't afford to pay corporate rates. You want me to do charity work? I want you to do meaningful work. There's a difference. Amanda turned the tablet around, showing him a list of organizations. This one provides business mentorship to formerly incarcerated people trying to start their own companies. This one helps low-income families navigate financial literacy. This one supports workers dealing with workplace discrimination. All of them could use someone with your experience. Mark studied the list, feeling something uncomfortable twist in his chest. You're saying I should help people I used to ignore. I'm saying you should help people you're now in a position to understand. Mark, you've spent 3 weeks living like most of America lives. Smaller space, tighter budget, no safety net of status. That gives you perspective you didn't have before. And you think that makes me qualified to help people? I think it makes you credible. People don't want perfect heroes. They want honest ones. If you can show them that you learned something real from losing everything, they'll listen. Amanda set down the tablet. But you have to actually mean it. No performance, no redemption theater. Real work with real people who will know immediately if you're faking. Mark sat down on one of the boxes, the cardboard creaking under his weight. What if I'm not good at it? What if I fail again? Then you fail. But at least you'll fail trying to be better instead of failing because you didn't try at all. Amanda softened her voice. Mark, I've known you for 8 years. You're arrogant and you're blind to your own privilege, but you're not cruel. Not at your core. The man who threw wine at someone was the man who forgot to be human. The man sitting in this apartment right now has a chance to remember. Ethan said something similar about how this doesn't have to define me if I do the work. Smart man. Smart man who destroyed my entire life. Amanda shook her head. You destroyed your own life. He just removed the scaffolding that was hiding the cracks. There's a difference. Mark closed his eyes, feeling the truth of that settle into his bones. He'd spent 3 weeks alternating between rage and grief, between blaming Ethan and blaming himself, between wanting revenge and wanting oblivion. But underneath all of it was a simpler truth he'd been avoiding. Amanda was right. Ethan was right. He'd done this to himself. Which organization should I start with? He asked quietly. Amanda smiled. The one that scares you most. The formerly incarcerated program. They meet Thursday nights at a community center in South Brooklyn. I already told them you were interested. You're very presumptuous. I'm very good at my job. Also, I believe in you even when you don't believe in yourself. It's annoying, but someone has to do it. Mark looked at her, this woman who had every reason to abandon him and no reason to help, and felt gratitude thick in his throat. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Wait until you actually show up. Amanda collected her tablet and headed for the door. Thursday at 7. Don't be late. And Mark? Lose the expensive watch you're probably still wearing. She left before he could respond. Mark looked down at his wrist where his Patek Philippe usually lived. He'd sold it 2 weeks ago along with most of his jewelry, using the money to cover legal fees and the apartment deposit. His wrist was bare now, marked only by a thin line of paler skin where the watch had protected him from the sun. He walked to the window and looked out at the street below. People moved along the sidewalk with the purposeful energy of those going somewhere important. A woman pushed a stroller. A man carried groceries. Two teenagers laughed at something on a phone. Normal life, continuing for everyone who hadn't destroyed themselves on camera. Mark thought about Thursday night, about walking into a room full of people who'd been judged harshly by the world, who'd made mistakes and paid prices and were trying to rebuild. People who would see through any performance, any attempt to use their struggles as a path back to respectability. People who deserved better than another wealthy man slumming for redemption. The thought terrified him, which meant Amanda was right. It was exactly where he needed to start. Thursday arrived faster than Mark wanted. He spent the intervening days unpacking boxes, setting up the apartment, and researching the program Amanda had recommended. The Second Chance Business Initiative helped formerly incarcerated individuals develop business plans, secure funding, and navigate the legal complexities of starting companies with criminal records. The founder was a woman named Patricia Chen, who'd spent 8 years in prison for financial fraud, served her time, and built a successful consulting firm that now employed 40 people. Mark read her story 3 times, feeling the uncomfortable recognition of someone who'd also made catastrophic mistakes and had to rebuild from rubble. At 6:45 p.m. on Thursday, he stood outside the community center in South Brooklyn, watching people arrive. They came in clusters and alone, carrying notebooks and laptops, wearing everything from business casual to construction clothes. Mark had chosen jeans and a plain button-down shirt, trying to strike a balance between respectful and accessible. He felt like he was wearing a costume. "You coming in, or are you going to stand out here all night?" A woman's voice, sharp with humor. Mark turned to find an older black woman watching him from the entrance, her arms crossed, her expression knowing. "You look like you're about to bolt. Is it that obvious?" "Honey, I've been watching nervous white men try to decide if they belong here for 15 years. You all get the same look. Somewhere between terrified and constipated." She extended her hand. "Patricia Chen. You must be Mark." Mark shook her hand, surprised by her firm grip. "Amanda told you I was coming." "Amanda told me a lot of things, including that you're the guy from that video." Patricia's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened. "The one where your wife threw wine at someone for looking poor." "That's me." "Mm-hmm. And what exactly are you doing here, Mark? Trying to learn something from us? From anyone willing to teach me?" Patricia studied him for a long moment, and Mark had the distinct feeling he was being evaluated more thoroughly than any board interview he'd ever endured. Finally, she nodded. "All right, you can come in, but I've got rules. First, you don't talk about who you used to be unless someone asks. Second, you don't try to fix anyone's problems unless they invite you to. Third, if you waste our time with performance art, I will personally escort you out and make sure everyone knows you're not welcome back. We clear?" "Crystal clear." "Good. Come on." Patricia led him inside to a large room with folding chairs arranged in a circle. About 20 people had already gathered, ranging in age from early 20s to late 60s, representing every race and background Mark could identify. They looked up when he entered, curious but not hostile. Not yet. "Everyone, this is Mark," Patricia announced. "He's here to observe tonight, maybe participate if it feels right. Mark, this is the group. They'll tell you their names if they want to. Otherwise, just listen and learn." Mark took an empty chair between a young Hispanic man with tattoos covering both arms and an older white woman who looked like someone's grandmother. The grandmother smiled at him. The young man ignored him completely. "All right," Patricia settled into her own chair. "We're picking up where we left off last week. Carlos, you were talking about the licensing issues with your food truck." The young man next to Mark leaned forward. "Yeah, so the city approved my health permit, but now they're saying I need additional insurance because of my record. It's like 3 times what a normal operator pays, and I can't afford it without the loan I'm trying to get. But I can't get the loan without proof of insurance. I'm stuck." "Did you talk to the broker I recommended?" someone across the circle asked. "He said the same thing. My conviction makes me high risk, so everyone wants more money up front." Patricia nodded thoughtfully. "This is a common problem. Anyone else dealt with this kind of catch-22? Hands rose around the circle. Stories emerged, each one a variation on the same theme. People trying to move forward while systems designed to punish them kept pulling them back. Mark listened, taking mental notes, his business brain automatically searching for solutions even though Patricia's rules forbade him from offering them. The grandmother beside him spoke up. I got around it by partnering with someone who had clean credit. They held the license and insurance in their name while I ran operations. Technically legal, practically effective. But risky, another man pointed out. If your partner decides to screw you, you've got no legal recourse. True. But sometimes risk is the only option we've got. The conversation continued for 90 minutes, covering everything from discriminatory hiring practices to the hidden costs of staying legally compliant to the emotional toll of being constantly judged by past mistakes. Mark sat quietly, watching these people navigate obstacles he'd never had to consider, demonstrating resilience he'd never had to develop. Near the end of the session, Patricia turned to him. Mark, you've been quiet. Got any thoughts? Every eye in the room fixed on him. Mark felt his mouth go dry. I'm not sure I should. Patricia's rules said, I'm giving you permission. What are you thinking? Mark took a breath. I'm thinking I've spent my entire career solving business problems, but I never had to solve them with one hand tied behind my back. Every advantage I had, capital, connections, reputation, you don't have, and yet you're building businesses anyway. That's remarkable. You sound surprised, the young man next to him said, his voice flat. I am surprised, and I'm embarrassed that I'm surprised, if that makes sense. It doesn't. What Carlos means, Patricia interjected gently, is that you're still operating from the assumption that we're disadvantaged, that we're working harder for less because the system is unfair. Isn't that true? It's true. But the way you said it makes it sound like we're victims who need saving. We're not. We're entrepreneurs who need fair access. Patricia leaned forward. Mark, you want to know what someone like you can actually offer us? Not sympathy, not charity. Access. You've got connections we don't. You've got credibility with banks and investors and city officials. That's what we need. Not someone to fix our problems. Someone to open doors that are closed to us. Mark felt the words land like physical blows. You're right, I'm sorry. Don't apologize, just listen better. Patricia stood, signaling the end of the session. All right, everyone, same time next week. Carlos, I'll connect you with someone who might be able to help with that insurance issue. The group dispersed slowly, people clustering in conversations, exchanging information, supporting each other with the ease of those who'd been through similar battles. Mark stood awkwardly, unsure if he should leave or linger, until Patricia appeared at his elbow. You did okay, she said. Not great, but okay. I appreciate the generous assessment. You want brutal honesty? You walked in here like every other wealthy person who thinks poverty is a character flaw they can fix with advice. But you listened when called out, which is more than most do. That's worth something. What do I do next? Patricia considered him. You come back next week. You listen more. You offer less. And when you're ready, when you've actually earned the trust of this group, you use those connections you've still got to help someone here actually succeed. Not as charity, as partnership. I can do that. We'll see. Patricia handed him a business card. My direct line. Don't call unless it's important. Mark left the community center feeling more uncertain than when he'd arrived. He'd thought this would be about teaching, about sharing his expertise with people who needed it. Instead, he'd been given a masterclass in his own blindness, in the assumptions he carried like invisible weights. The walk to the subway took him through neighborhoods he'd driven past 1,000 times without seeing. Corner stores with hand-painted signs. Apartment buildings with laundry hanging from fire escapes. People sitting on stoops, talking and laughing and living lives that had nothing to do with corporate America or business deals or the kind of success Mark had spent 30 years chasing. His phone buzzed. A text from Amanda. How'd it go? Mark typed back, humbling. I'll tell you more tomorrow. Good. Humbling is the point. He pocketed his phone and descended into the subway, squeezing into a crowded car between a woman with 2 sleeping children and a man in a hospital orderly uniform coming off shift. The train rattled through darkness, and Mark closed his eyes, thinking about Carlos and his food truck, about the catch-22 of needing insurance to get a loan and needing a loan to get insurance. Mark still had connections, bankers who owed him favors, insurance brokers he'd worked with for years, city officials who'd attended his galas. He couldn't give Carlos money. That would be exactly the kind of charity Patricia warned against. But he could make a phone call. He could open a door. That was something. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't absolution. But it was something real. The train stopped at his station. Mark climbed back to street level and walked the 3 blocks to his apartment building, passing a bodega where the owner nodded at him with the recognition of a regular customer. Mark nodded back, feeling the strange comfort of being seen as just another person in the neighborhood instead of a CEO with a reputation to maintain. Inside his apartment, he opened his laptop and started drafting an email to his former insurance broker, not asking for charity, just asking for a fair assessment of a client with a solid business plan who happened to have a record. He explained Carlos's situation without using names, outlined the business model, included rough revenue projections based on what he'd heard at the meeting. He sent the email before he could second-guess himself, then opened a second draft to a banker he'd known for 15 years. Same approach. Fair assessment. Real business. Deserves consideration. By the time he finished, it was past midnight. Mark sat back in his chair, looking at the modest apartment that was now his life, and felt something that might have been purpose starting to take root. His phone rang. Unknown number again. Mark's heart jumped. Could it be Ethan? But the voice that answered was female, professional, unfamiliar. Mr. Calder? This is Janet Reeves from the New York Business Journal. I'm doing a follow-up piece on the Cromwell incident and its aftermath. Do you have a few minutes to talk? Mark's instinct was to refuse. He'd done his apology tour, issued his statements, accepted his consequences. The last thing he needed was more press coverage. But then he thought about Patricia's question. What are you doing here, Mark? I have a few minutes, he said. Great, I'll be direct. The narrative around you has started shifting. People are seeing you less as the villain and more as a cautionary tale. How do you feel about that characterization? Mark chose his words carefully. I think it's accurate. What happened at the Cromwell Grand revealed something true about who I'd become. Someone who judged people by their appearance instead of their character. Someone who'd forgotten that dignity isn't something you earn based on your bank account. That's worth being cautious about. Have you had any contact with Ethan Cross since the incident? Once. He called me shortly after I was removed as CEO. It was generous of him, more generous than I deserved. What did he say? That this doesn't have to define me forever if I'm willing to do the work of becoming someone better. I'm trying to take that seriously. What does that work look like? Mark glanced at the drafts still open on his laptop. Right now it looks like learning to listen instead of lecture. Learning to be useful instead of important. Learning that the people I used to ignore or dismiss have more to teach me than I ever had to teach them. There was a pause on the other end. That's quite a departure from the image you projected at Calder Industries. It is, because that image was based on a lie. The lie that success makes you superior. It doesn't. It just makes you visible. And when you're visible and you choose to be cruel, everyone sees exactly who you are. Some people might say you're only saying this because you got caught, that if the deal hadn't fallen through, you'd still be the same person. They'd be right to be skeptical. I'm skeptical of myself. Mark stood and walked to his window, looking out at the ordinary street below. But the truth is, getting caught was the best thing that could have happened to me. Not because I wanted to be humiliated, but because I needed to be stopped before I became completely irredeemable. That's a remarkable level of self-awareness. It's a remarkable level of having no other choice. When you lose everything, you either look honestly at why it happened, or you spend the rest of your life bitter and defensive. I'm trying to choose honesty. They talked for another 10 minutes, covering his divorce, his new apartment, his work with the Second Chance Business Initiative. Mark was careful not to make himself sound heroic, not to position his volunteer work as redemption earned rather than lessons being learned. When they finally ended the call, he felt drained but clean, like he'd passed some kind of test he hadn't known he was taking. The article published 3 days later with the headline, Mark Calder on Rebuilding After the Fall, Getting caught was the best thing that happened to me. The response was mixed. Some people saw it as genuine growth. Others saw it as calculated image rehabilitation. Mark read the comments once, then closed the browser and went back to work. The insurance broker had responded positively. He was willing to meet with Carlos, assess his business plan, offer rates that were high, but not prohibitive. Mark forwarded the contact information to Patricia with a brief note. One door opened. Let me know if there are others. She responded within an hour. Come to the next 3 meetings. Prove you're serious. Then we'll talk about other doors. Mark attended the next 3 meetings. He listened more than he spoke. He took notes. He learned names and stories and business models. He watched Patricia lead with a combination of tough love and genuine investment that reminded him of the kind of leader he'd always wanted to be but had never quite achieved. In the 4th meeting, a woman named Denise asked him directly, "Why are you really here? What do you get out of this?" The room went quiet. Mark felt the weight of 20 pairs of eyes, all waiting to see if he'd give them a polished answer or the truth. "Honestly," he said, "I get the chance to be useful in a way that matters. I spent 30 years being important, and it made me terrible. Maybe if I spend the next 30 being useful, I'll become decent." Denise nodded slowly. "That's real. I'll accept that." Patricia caught his eye from across the circle and gave him the smallest nod of approval. It felt like winning an award worth more than any he'd received at the height of his power. After the meeting, Carlos approached him. "Patricia said you talked to someone about insurance." "I did. He's willing to meet with you. No promises, but he'll assess your situation fairly." "Why'd you do that?" Mark thought about all the ways he could answer, all the diplomatic responses, all the redemption story answers that would sound good in interviews. Instead, he went with truth. "Because I'm trying to learn how to help instead of perform. And because your food truck business deserves the same fair chance any business deserves, regardless of what's on your record." Carlos studied him for a long moment. "I don't trust you yet, but I appreciate the connection." "That's fair. If it works out, if I get the insurance and the loan and actually get this truck on the road, you can come by for a free meal. Deal?" Mark smiled. "Deal." Walking home that night, Mark felt something he hadn't felt in weeks. Not happiness exactly, not peace, but something like direction. He was 30 years into a life that had been built on sand, and now he was learning to build on something that might actually hold. His phone buzzed with an email notification. The sender was listed only as E-Cross. Mark's pulse quickened as he opened it. "Mr. Calder, I've been following your progress over the past month. The work you're doing with the Second Chance Business Initiative is noteworthy. Not because it earns you redemption, that's not how redemption works, but because it suggests you're willing to be uncomfortable in service of becoming better. I'm writing because I have a proposal. My firm is looking to fund a series of small business accelerators focused on underserved communities. The Second Chance Initiative is exactly the kind of program we're interested in supporting. If you're willing to serve as an advisor to these accelerators, not as a celebrity figurehead, but as someone doing actual strategic work, I'd like to discuss partnership possibilities. This isn't forgiveness. This isn't reconciliation. This is a business opportunity based on mutual interest in supporting entrepreneurs who've been systematically excluded from traditional funding channels. If that interests you, let me know. Regards, Ethan Cross." Mark read the email 4 times, sitting down on a bench outside a closed grocery store, watching cars pass in the dark. Ethan Cross, the man who'd destroyed his empire, was offering him a path back to meaningful work. Not as CEO, not as someone important, as someone useful. Mark pulled out his phone and typed a reply. "Mr. Cross, I'm interested. I'm not because I think I deserve your trust, but because the work matters, and I want to be part of making it succeed. I'll earn my place in this partnership the same way everyone else has to, through results, not reputation. When would you like to meet? Mark Calder." He sent it before fear could stop him, then sat on the bench watching the street, waiting for a response that might not come. His old life was gone. His marriage was over. His reputation was in ruins. But sitting there in the dark outside a closed grocery store, Mark Calder felt more alive than he had in years. His phone buzzed. Ethan's response was brief. "Coffee. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. I'll send you the address. Mark smiled, closed his phone, and walked home through streets that were starting to feel familiar, past people who were starting to recognize him not as the CEO from the video, but as Mark from the neighborhood, the guy in apartment 4B who always held the door. Tomorrow he'd meet Ethan Cross and find out if a man could rebuild from ruins. Tonight he'd sleep in his small apartment and dream of food trucks and second chances and the possibility that getting caught had truly been the best thing that ever happened to him. The lesson was finally landing. Power meant nothing. Dignity meant everything, and the only way to earn back what he'd lost was to prove he understood the difference. The coffee shop Ethan chose was a small place tucked between a laundromat and a bookstore in a part of Brooklyn that gentrification hadn't quite reached yet. Mark arrived 15 minutes early, ordered a black coffee from a barista who didn't recognize him, and took a seat by the window where he could watch the morning foot traffic. Construction workers grabbed breakfast sandwiches. Office workers rushed past with phones pressed to their ears. A woman fed pigeons from a paper bag, ignoring the disapproving looks from passers-by. Normal people living normal lives, completely unaware that the man sitting by the window had once commanded boardrooms and made decisions that affected thousands of employees. The anonymity felt like a gift. At exactly 9 a.m., Ethan Cross walked through the door. He wore the same kind of unremarkable clothing Mark remembered from the gala: dark jeans, a plain gray sweater, sneakers that had seen better days. He ordered coffee with the casual efficiency of someone who'd been here before, then joined Mark at the small table, settling into his chair with the quiet ease of someone completely comfortable in his own skin. "Thank you for meeting me," Mark said, aware of how formal he sounded. "Thank you for coming." Ethan took a sip of his coffee, studying Mark over the rim of his cup. "You look different. Cheaper clothes, less expensive haircut, no watch." "That's not what I meant." Ethan set down his cup. "You look lighter, like you've been carrying something heavy and finally put it down." Mark considered that. "I think I have. Turns out maintaining an image of success is exhausting when you're not sure you deserve it. And now? Now I'm just trying to deserve the next opportunity. Starting from zero seems more honest." Ethan nodded slowly, and Mark noticed details he'd missed at the gala. The man had the kind of weathered hands that suggested he'd done physical work at some point. A small scar above his left eyebrow, eyes that assessed without judging, watching without assumptions. This was someone who'd learned to see people clearly, probably through hard experience. "I read about your work with the Second Chance Initiative," Ethan said. "Patricia Chen is selective about who she lets into that program. The fact that she's kept you around suggests you're doing more than performing." "I'm trying. Some days I fail, but I keep showing up." "That's all anyone can ask." Ethan pulled out a tablet, opening a document. "I'm going to be direct about what I'm proposing. My firm has been funding small business accelerators for the past 8 years. We focus specifically on entrepreneurs who've been systematically excluded from traditional capital, formerly incarcerated individuals, immigrants, people from low-income communities, anyone the banking system has decided isn't worth the risk. That's a significant population. It's most of America. We've funded 42 accelerators so far across 16 cities. Success rate is about 60%, which is better than most traditional startups. Turns out people who've had to fight for every opportunity don't give up easily." Ethan turned the tablet toward Mark, showing a map dotted with locations. "We're expanding. I need people who understand business infrastructure, who can help these entrepreneurs navigate legal requirements, funding structures, market analysis. People who've actually built companies, not just invested in them." Mark studied the map, seeing cities he'd visited dozens of times without ever noticing the populations Ethan was describing. "And you think I'm qualified for this?" "I think you could be. You've got the technical knowledge. You've got the connections, even if they're damaged. And you've experienced enough humiliation to maybe, possibly understand what it's like to be underestimated and dismissed." Ethan pulled the tablet back. "But I need to know something first." "All right. Why are you really doing this? The volunteer work, the small apartment, the humble routine? Is it genuine transformation or sophisticated image rehabilitation?" The question hung between them, sharp and unavoidable. Mark could feel Ethan watching him, reading every micro-expression, every hesitation. This was the test, not the phone call after his firing. Not the email last night. This moment, right here, where he had to articulate something true or lose whatever chance he'd been given. Honestly, Mark said quietly, I don't know yet. I want it to be transformation. I'm doing the work I think transforms people. But I'm self-aware enough to know I could be lying to myself. That maybe I'm just performing a more sophisticated version of who I was, someone who learned to fake humility instead of fake importance. Ethan's expression didn't change. That's more honest than I expected. Patricia taught me that uncertainty is more trustworthy than certainty. People who are absolutely sure they've changed probably haven't. Patricia is wise. Ethan finished his coffee, his eyes never leaving Mark's face. Here's what I'm willing to offer. A 6-month trial position as a senior advisor to 3 of our accelerator programs. You'll work directly with entrepreneurs, help them develop business plans, connect them with resources. The pay is $60,000 for 6 months. That's what we pay all our advisors. Mark did the math instantly. $60,000 for 6 months was less than he used to spend on wine in a year. It was also more than most Americans earned annually. The gap between those two facts felt like a chasm he was still learning to measure. That's generous, he said carefully. It's fair. Everyone else doing this work gets the same rate. Ethan leaned forward slightly. But there are conditions. First, you report directly to the program directors in each city, not to me. Not to anyone who might be impressed by your name. You're evaluated based on results, not reputation. Second, if you use this position for media attention or image rehabilitation, you're out immediately. This isn't about your redemption story. It's about helping people who need actual support, not photo opportunities. Understood? Third, and this is the hardest one, you have to be willing to fail. Some of the entrepreneurs you work with won't make it. Some will take your advice and ignore it. Some will succeed despite you, not because of you. Your job isn't to be the savior. It's to be one resource among many. Can you handle that? Mark thought about Carlos and the food truck, about the insurance connection he'd made that might lead nowhere, about all the times in his corporate career when he'd needed to be the hero, the one who solved problems and received credit. Could he genuinely let go of that need? I think so, he said, but you should know. I'm going to struggle with that. I'm hardwired to fix things and take credit. Unlearning that is going to take time. As long as you're conscious of it, we can work with it. The moment you stop being conscious of it is when you become a problem. Ethan slid a thin folder across the table. Read this tonight. It's an overview of the 3 programs I'm assigning you to. 1 in Detroit, 1 in Atlanta, 1 here in Brooklyn. Each has a cohort of 10 to 15 entrepreneurs at different stages. You'll spend 1 week a month in each location with remote support in between. Mark opened the folder, scanning names and business descriptions. A woman in Detroit building a cleaning service that employed formerly incarcerated women. A man in Atlanta developing affordable childcare for shift workers. A group in Brooklyn creating a cooperative grocery store in a food desert. These weren't Silicon Valley startups dreaming of billion-dollar exits. These were survival businesses, dignity businesses, businesses that existed because their communities needed them. When would I start? Mark asked. 2 weeks. That gives you time to finish up with the Second Chance initiative and prepare for travel. You'll meet with each program director before your first visit. They'll set expectations and boundaries. Ethan stood, extending his hand. This is your chance, Mark, not to rebuild what you had, but to build something that might actually matter. Mark shook his hand, feeling the calluses he'd noticed earlier, the firmness of someone who'd worked with their hands. Why are you giving me this chance? After everything? Ethan held his gaze. Because I've been where you are. Not the same circumstances, but close enough. Someone gave me a chance when I didn't deserve it. I'm paying that forward. Don't make me regret it. He left before Mark could respond, walking out into the morning sidewalk traffic and disappearing like he'd never been there. Mark sat alone with the folder, his coffee growing cold, and felt the weight of expectation settling onto his shoulders. Not the weight of being important, the weight of being useful. The weight of knowing that real people with real struggles were depending on him to be better than he'd been. He spent the next 2 weeks preparing like he was studying for the most important exam of his life. He read everything he could find about the cities he'd be working in, their economic histories, their current challenges, their community structures. He researched the specific industries his assigned entrepreneurs were entering. He reached out to contacts who might be able to help, carefully explaining his new role without asking for special treatment. Patricia noticed the change in his energy. "You're leaving us," she said after a Thursday meeting, not quite a question. "Not leaving, expanding. I'm taking a position with an accelerator program, 3 cities, similar work to what we do here." "With Ethan Cross's organization?" Patricia's eyes sharpened. "I heard rumors he was interested in you. How did you Mark, there are maybe a dozen people in this country doing what Ethan does at his scale. We all know each other. We all talk." She smiled slightly. "He called me 2 weeks ago, asked about you, asked if you were real or performing." "What did you tell him?" "That you were trying. That trying was more than most people do. That I thought you could be real if someone gave you enough rope and enough time." Patricia crossed her arms. "So don't prove me wrong. These programs Ethan runs, they're the real thing. People depend on them. You show up halfway. You do more damage than good." "I understand." "Do you?" "Because it's easy to be humble when you're at rock bottom. It's harder when people start treating you with respect again, when you start feeling important again. That's when most people slip back into old patterns." Mark felt the warning land. "How do I prevent that?" "You stay uncomfortable. The moment you start feeling too comfortable, too confident, too sure you figured it out, that's when you need to check yourself." Patricia put a hand on his shoulder. "You're doing good work here, Mark. Keep doing it wherever you go. Not because it makes you feel better about yourself, because the work matters whether you're doing it or not." "I will. I promise." "Don't promise. Just do it." His last meeting with the Second Chance Initiative felt like graduation and goodbye. Carlos had gotten his insurance, secured his loan, and was 2 weeks away from launching his food truck. Denise had finalized a business plan for a catering company specializing in healthy meals for schools. 3 others had secured funding. 2 had decided their business ideas weren't viable and were grateful they'd discovered that before investing their life savings. "You helped," Patricia told him as the group dispersed. "Not as much as you probably think you did. Not as the savior, but as someone who opened a few doors and got out of the way. That's valuable." Mark hugged her, surprising them both. "Thank you for taking a chance on me." "Thank Ethan. He's the one who suggested I might want to give you a shot. I just followed his instinct." She pulled back, looking him in the eye. "One more thing. The people you're about to work with, they're going to test you. They're going to push boundaries, question your motives, see if you break. That's not personal. That's survival. They've been let down by people who looked helpful before. Show them you're different by staying different." The next morning, Mark packed a bag for Detroit. He'd sold his expensive luggage weeks ago, so everything fit into a single carry-on that had cost $40 at a discount store. He checked his reflection in the bathroom mirror: plain shirt, cheaper jeans, hair that badly needed cutting. He looked like 1,000 other travelers heading to 1,000 other cities for work that wouldn't make headlines or change the world, but might help a few people get a little closer to stability. The flight to Detroit was uneventful. Mark read briefing materials on the program he'd be working with, memorizing names and business concepts, trying to understand the challenges specific to Detroit's economy. The city had been written off by so many people for so long that the entrepreneurs building businesses there carried an extra weight of proof, an obligation to justify their existence to a world that had decided they weren't worth attention. The program director, a woman named Shanice Williams, met him at a community center on Detroit's east side. She was younger than Mark expected, maybe 35, with natural hair pulled back in a colorful scarf and an expression that suggested she didn't suffer fools. "You're Mark Calder," she said, not offering her hand. "The one from the video." "That's me." "Ethan told me you were trying to do better. I told him I'd believe it when I saw it." Shanice crossed her arms. "I run a tight program here. 15 entrepreneurs, all women, all formerly incarcerated, all building service businesses. They've been dismissed and underestimated their entire lives. I won't let someone come in and make them feel that way again, even accidentally. We clear?" "Crystal clear." "Good. The women arrive in 30 minutes. You're going to sit in the back, observe the first session, and keep your mouth shut unless someone directly asks you a question. I need to see how you handle being invisible." Mark felt a flash of his old defensiveness. He'd flown here to help, not to be sidelined, but caught himself. This wasn't about him. Shanice was protecting her people, making sure he understood the hierarchy. He was the guest. She was the authority. The women she served came first. "I can do that," he said quietly. "We'll see." The women began arriving in clusters, their ages ranging from early 20s to late 50s, carrying notebooks and bags, greeting each other with the easy familiarity of people who'd been through something together. They noticed Mark immediately, their eyes assessing, measuring, deciding whether he was threat or ally or something else entirely. Shanice gathered them in a circle. "Before we start, I want to introduce someone. This is Mark Calder. He's going to be working with our program as an advisor. Some of you might recognize him from the internet. The video where his wife threw wine at someone because they looked poor." The women murmured. A few pulled out phones, clearly looking up the video. Mark felt heat rise in his face, but kept his expression neutral. "Mark made a terrible mistake," Shanice continued. "He's trying to do better. Ethan Cross thinks he deserves a chance to prove himself. I'm willing to give him that chance, but only if you are. This is your program, your space, your trust to give or withhold. So I'm putting it to a vote. Mark stays and observes today. After the session, you decide if he comes back next week. Majority rules." Mark's stomach dropped. He'd never considered that the people he was supposed to help might vote him out before he even started. It was terrifying. It was also exactly right. These women had every reason to be skeptical of wealthy people showing up to help after personal disasters. He'd have to earn their acceptance the same way anyone else did. "All right," one woman said from across the circle. She was older, maybe 50, with gray streaking her black hair and eyes that had seen too much. "But he sits in the back. And if he says anything condescending, even once, he's gone." "Agreed," several others echoed. Shanice looked at Mark. "You heard them. Back row, silent observer." Mark took a seat against the wall and spent the next 2 hours watching Shanice lead one of the most effective business development sessions he'd ever witnessed. She knew every woman by name, knew their businesses intimately, asked probing questions that revealed gaps in their thinking without making them feel stupid. When one woman admitted she was struggling with cash flow, 3 others jumped in with solutions they'd tried. When another expressed frustration with city licensing requirements, Shanice pulled out a contact list and made calls right there, navigating bureaucracy with the efficiency of someone who'd done it 100 times. These women were smart. They were resourceful. They were building businesses with creativity and determination that would have impressed any investor Mark had ever worked with. And yet Mark knew that traditional funding sources would dismiss them instantly based on their records, their zip codes, their lack of formal business education. The session ended, and Shanice dismissed everyone except for Mark. The women filed out, several glancing back at him with expressions ranging from curious to skeptical to outright hostile. "Wait here," Shanice said. "They're going to talk about you in the parking lot. I'll get their decision in 10 minutes. She left him alone in the empty room. Mark sat in the silence, listening to muffled voices outside, knowing his future in this program was being decided by people who owed him nothing and had every reason to reject him. It was the most honest evaluation he'd received in years. Shanice returned 15 minutes later. Her expression was unreadable. "They voted," she said simply. Mark's throat was dry. "And 10-5 in favor of giving you another chance. The 5 against weren't hostile. They just don't trust you yet. Can't blame them for that." Relief washed through him. "Thank you. Thank them. I won't waste this chance." They said one more thing. Shanice pulled up a chair sitting across from him. "They want to know your story, not the public version, not the apology tour. They want to know who you really were before the video, what you've actually learned, and why you're here beyond just image rehabilitation. They're giving you next week's session to answer that, and they'll know if you're lying." Mark felt panic flutter in his chest. "I'm supposed to give my testimony?" "You're supposed to be honest, real honest, the kind of honest that hurts." Shanice leaned forward. "These women have all had to account for their worst moments in front of judges, parole boards, social workers, potential employers. They've all had to own their mistakes publicly and repeatedly. If you want their trust, you have to do the same. Not the sanitized version you gave the media. The real version where you admit who you were and what that cost. What if they decide they can't work with me after hearing it? Then they can't work with you. and you accept that and move on. Shanice stood. But my guess? They'll respect honesty more than perfection. Everyone in that room has failed catastrophically. The question isn't whether you failed, it's whether you're actually learning from it. Mark spent the flight back to New York drafting and deleting speeches. Everything he wrote sounded too polished, too apologetic, too much like the kind of statement a PR professional would craft. By the time he landed, he'd given up on prepared remarks and decided to just tell the truth, however ugly it sounded. His week in Atlanta was similar. The program director there, a man named Marcus Thompson, was less confrontational than Shanice but equally protective of his entrepreneurs. The vote was closer, 8-7 in favor of letting Mark continue. Again, he was asked to speak about his journey at the next session, to make himself vulnerable in front of people who had far more to lose than he did. The Brooklyn program was run by Patricia's former colleague, a woman named Keisha Monroe, who'd served time for embezzlement and rebuilt her life as an advocate for financial literacy in underserved communities. She didn't put it to a vote. She just looked at Mark and said, "You know what you need to do. Do it honestly or don't do it at all." By the time Mark returned to his apartment, he'd been challenged, questioned, and evaluated by 3 different groups of people who had no reason to trust him and every reason to doubt. He should have felt defeated. Instead, he felt alive. These people saw him clearly, they demanded his truth without apology, and they were giving him the chance to earn their trust through action, not reputation. His phone buzzed, a text from Ethan. "How were the first visits?" Mark typed back, "Humbling. They're making me account for who I was. It's terrifying and exactly right." The response came quickly. "Good. That means you're in the right place. Next week you speak. Make it count." Mark set down his phone and opened his laptop. He started writing, not a speech, but a confession. The story of a man who'd spent 30 years building an empire on the foundation of believing success made him superior. A man who'd judged people by their clothes and dismissed them when they didn't meet his standards of importance. A man who'd been so insulated by privilege that he couldn't see his own cruelty until it cost him everything. He wrote about Lydia throwing the wine, about calling security, about the laughter from the crowd, about how satisfying it had felt in the moment to put someone in their place, to defend his territory against perceived intrusion. He wrote about the shame that came after, about watching his empire collapse, about sitting in this small apartment realizing he'd destroyed himself through nothing more complicated than everyday cruelty. He wrote until his eyes burned and his fingers ached, getting it all down while it was still raw enough to hurt. This wasn't redemption. This wasn't absolution. This was just accounting, taking inventory of who he'd been so he could measure how far he had to go. When he finished, it was past midnight. The document ran 7 pages, single-spaced, no polish or performance. Just truth, ugly and unvarnished. Mark saved it, closed his laptop, and sat in the dark, listening to the city hum outside his window. In 7 days, he'd stand in front of 15 women in Detroit who'd survived more than he'd ever faced and tell them exactly who he'd been. Then he'd do it again in Atlanta. Then again in Brooklyn. 3 times, he'd make himself completely vulnerable to people who had every right to reject him. The old Mark Calder would have been terrified, would have found a way to spin the story, soften the edges, make himself look better. The new Mark Calder, if he could even claim that person existed yet, understood that this was the only path forward. Not through performance, but through honest accounting. Not through redemption, but through service that might eventually earn it. He pulled out his phone one more time and texted Ethan, "Thank you for this. Whatever happens next, thank you for the chance." The response came 5 minutes later. "Don't thank me. Thank the people giving you their time. And Mark, don't try to be inspiring next week. Just be honest. That's more valuable." Mark smiled in the darkness and finally let himself sleep, knowing the hardest part was still ahead, but feeling for the first time since the Cromwell Grand, like he might actually be walking in the right direction. The week passed like water through clenched fingers. Mark revised his confession 40 times, each draft stripping away another layer of protective language until only raw truth remained. By Thursday night, sitting alone in his apartment with a printed copy that he'd read so many times the pages had gone soft at the edges, he understood that no amount of preparation could make this easier. He was about to stand in front of people who'd earned their second chances through years of hard work and tell them he thought he deserved the same consideration after a few months of humility. The arrogance of that presumption kept him awake until 3 a.m. The flight to Detroit Friday morning was turbulent, the plane shaking through storm clouds that matched Mark's internal weather. He landed at noon, grabbed lunch he couldn't taste, and arrived at the community center an hour early. Shanice was already there, setting up chairs, and she raised an eyebrow when Mark walked in. "Couldn't stay away?" she asked. "Couldn't sit still," Mark admitted. "I'm terrified." "Good. Fear means you understand the stakes." Shanice straightened a row of chairs, not looking at him. "You know what these women are going to be listening for? Whether I'm real or performing. Deeper than that. They're going to be listening for whether you understand that what happened to you was justice, not tragedy. That you weren't a victim of cancel culture or social media or bad luck. That you earned every consequence." She turned to face him. "Can you say that out loud, without qualification or self-pity?" Mark felt the words stick in his throat, then forced them out. "I earned every consequence. What happened to me was justice." "Say it again, like you mean it." "I earned every consequence. What happened to me was justice." "One more time." "I earned every consequence." Mark's voice strengthened. "What happened to me was justice. I wasn't wronged. I was held accountable." Shanice nodded slowly. "Hold on to that feeling. When you're up there and feeling defensive, when someone pushes back hard, remember that moment right now. You earned this. All of it." The women started arriving at 10 minutes to 2. They came in talking, laughing, but the energy shifted when they saw Mark. Conversations dropped to whispers. Eyes found him, assessed him, looked away. He recognized the older woman who'd spoken up last week, the one with gray-streaked hair and hard-earned wisdom in her eyes. She took a seat directly across from where Mark stood, her posture making clear she wouldn't miss a single word. Shanice called the group to order. "All right, everyone, you know why we're here. Last week you voted to give Mark Calder another chance contingent on him being honest with us about who he was and why he's here. So that's what's happening today. Mark's going to talk, you're going to listen, and then we're going to decide together whether we want him in this space." She looked at Mark. "The floor is yours." Mark stood, his printed confession suddenly feeling inadequate in his hands. 15 women watched him with expressions ranging from curious to skeptical to actively hostile. The older woman hadn't blinked. "Thank you for this opportunity," Mark began, his voice steadier than he felt. "I know some of you researched me. You've seen the video, you know the basic story, but Shanice said you wanted the real version, not the public relations version, so that's what I'm going to give you." He took a breath and set aside his notes. They felt like a shield, and he'd been told to come without protection. 30 years ago, I graduated from business school with more ambition than sense. I wanted to build something that mattered, something that proved I was special. I built Calder Industries from a small manufacturing firm into a $2 billion company. I employed thousands of people. I made smart decisions and lucky bets. And somewhere along the way, I started believing that my success meant I was better than other people. The room was silent. Mark continued, "Not consciously. I never said out loud, 'I'm superior because I'm wealthy,' but I lived like it was true. I judged people by their clothes, their cars, their addresses. If someone looked like they hadn't made it, I assumed they weren't worth my time. If they couldn't help me, I didn't see them." His voice caught. "I spent 3 decades perfecting the art of not seeing people." And then a man named Ethan Cross walked into a gala I was throwing to celebrate the biggest deal of my career. He wore a cheap suit and no expensive watch. He stood near the service entrance. And my wife and I looked at him and decided he was nobody, less than nobody, an embarrassment, someone who needed to be removed before he ruined our perfect night. Mark forced himself to look at each woman as he spoke, not letting himself hide in the safety of the floor or the ceiling. My wife threw red wine in his face, in front of 300 people, in front of cameras. I called security to throw him out, and it felt good. It felt righteous, like we were defending our territory against someone who didn't deserve to be there. The older woman's expression hadn't changed, but her eyes had sharpened. She was listening the way a judge listens, weighing every word against everything she knew about human nature and lies. What we didn't know, what I didn't bother to learn, was that Ethan Cross owned 49% of the deal we were celebrating. $800 million. He was our partner, and we'd just humiliated him for entertainment because we thought he looked poor. Someone in the circle inhaled sharply. Mark pressed on. He pulled the deal that night, made one phone call and ended the partnership. Within 24 hours, I'd lost my job, my reputation, and any illusion that success made me a good person. The video went viral. 8 million views in the first day. Everyone saw exactly who I was when I thought nobody important was watching. Mark's hands were shaking. He pressed them against his thighs. Here's what I need you to understand. I didn't lose everything because of bad luck or cancel culture or a vindictive business partner. I lost everything because I revealed who I really was. Someone who thought dignity was something you earned through wealth. Someone who believed poor people deserved to be treated as less than human. Someone who'd spent 30 years surrounded by yes men and enablers who never challenged me to be better. The video didn't ruin my life. The video revealed a life that was already rotten underneath all the expensive surface. The silence in the room felt thick enough to touch. Mark could hear his own heartbeat, the shuffle of someone's feet against linoleum, the distant sound of traffic outside. I'm here because Ethan Cross gave me a chance I don't deserve. He called me after everything fell apart and told me this didn't have to define me forever if I was willing to do the work. And Patricia Chen let me into her program even though she had every reason not to trust me. And Shanice gave me this opportunity even though I'm the kind of person who probably would have dismissed everyone in this room based on your records without ever learning your names. Mark's voice broke. He let it break, didn't try to smooth it over. I'm here because I spent 30 years being important and it made me terrible. And I'm hoping that if I spend the next 30 years trying to be useful, I might eventually become decent. But I don't know if that's possible. I don't know if someone like me can actually change or if I'm just performing a more sophisticated version of the same arrogance. What I do know is this: you don't owe me forgiveness. You don't owe me trust. You don't owe me anything. If you decide I don't belong in this space, that's justice. That's accountability. And I'll accept it because, unlike what happened at the gala, this time I'll actually understand that the decision isn't about prejudice. It's about protecting yourselves from someone who hasn't yet proven he's safe to be around. Mark sat down. His legs felt weak. He'd said everything he came to say, held nothing back, offered no justifications. Now he just had to wait, while 15 women who knew more about real consequences than he ever would decided if he'd told them the truth. The older woman spoke first. "What's your name?" Mark looked at her, confused. "I'm sorry." "Your name. You've told us who you were and what you did, but I don't think you've actually introduced yourself." Understanding dawned. Mark stood again. "My name is Mark Calder. I'm 38 years old. I used to be a CEO. Right now I'm unemployed except for this advisor position. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. I'm divorced. I have no children. I don't know what I'm doing with my life except trying to be useful to people I used to ignore." The woman nodded. "My name is Gloria. I'm 52. I served 12 years for embezzlement, lost my family, my career, and any belief I had in second chances. Took me 8 years after release to stop hating myself long enough to try building something. This program gave me that chance. My business is a cleaning service that employs other formerly incarcerated women. We make enough to survive. That's success." She paused, looking at Mark with eyes that had seen through better liars than him. "You know what I heard in what you just said?" "No, ma'am." "I heard someone who's still measuring himself by what he lost instead of what he's learning. You keep talking about falling from being important to being useful, like there's a hierarchy there. Like important is better, and you've been demoted." Gloria leaned forward. "Here's what you need to understand if you want to work with us. Useful was always better than important. You didn't fall, you just finally landed at ground level where the rest of us live. Question is whether you can stay there or whether you're going to spend the whole time trying to climb back up to where you think you belong." The words hit Mark like a physical blow. She was right. Everything he'd said, every frame of reference he'd used, had positioned his current life as a come-down from his former life, as if helping people build businesses was somehow less valuable than running a corporation, as if service was a punishment rather than a calling. "You're absolutely right," Mark said quietly. "I'm still thinking like someone who measures worth by power. I don't know how to stop doing that. You stop by practicing, every day. every interaction, every time you catch yourself thinking someone else's work is beneath you or less valuable than what you used to do. Gloria's expression softened slightly. It takes time. It takes humility. And it takes people willing to call you out when you slip. You willing to accept that? Yes. Even when it's uncomfortable? Even when it feels unfair? Yes. Even when you think you've done the work and earned the benefit of the doubt? Mark thought about that, really thought about it. The old impulse was to say yes automatically, to promise anything to gain acceptance. But Gloria deserved honesty. "I'll try," he said, "but I'll probably mess up. I'll probably get defensive. I'll probably revert to old patterns when I'm stressed or tired. All I can promise is that I'll listen when you call it out, and I'll keep trying to do better." Gloria studied him for another long moment, then nodded. "That's honest enough. I can work with honest." A younger woman raised her hand. She looked maybe 25 with short, natural hair and a scar running along her jawline. "I'm Keisha, not the program director. Different Keisha. I served 6 years for armed robbery, got out 2 years ago. I'm building a catering business." "It's good to meet you, Keisha." "I want to ask you something." Keisha's voice was steady, but her jaw was tight. "When you looked at Ethan Cross at that gala, when you decided he was nobody, what exactly did you see? What made you so sure he didn't belong?" Mark forced himself to remember that moment clearly, not the sanitized version he'd been telling himself, but the actual thoughts that had gone through his mind. "I saw a cheap suit, shoes that weren't expensive, no watch or jewelry. He was standing near the service area. My brain put all those signals together and concluded, not wealthy, therefore not important, therefore not worth my attention. It took maybe 3 seconds to make that judgment. And if he'd been wearing an expensive suit, if he'd had the right watch, the right shoes, then I would have approached him, asked who he was, treated him like someone worth knowing. So your respect was for sale, just had to pay the right price in appearance." Mark felt shame burn through him. "Yes, that's exactly what it was." "And you think that's changed?" Keisha's voice sharpened. "You're sitting here in your cheaper clothes and your humble apartment. But if tomorrow you got a job offer for $1 million a year, if someone handed you back the keys to power, would you still be here? Would you still think we're worth your time?" The room went silent. Every eye was on Mark, waiting to see if he'd give them the easy answer or the true one. "I want to say yes," Mark said slowly. "I want to believe I've changed fundamentally. But the honest answer is I don't know. I don't know if my humility is real or if it's just a response to losing everything. I don't know if I'd stay useful if I had the option to be important again. The only way I'll find out is by staying at ground level long enough that it becomes home instead of exile." Keisha nodded slowly. "That's fair. At least you're not lying to us." The questions continued for another hour, each woman probing different aspects of Mark's transformation, testing the sincerity of his commitment, pushing him to admit things he'd been avoiding admitting to himself. By the end, Mark felt wrung out, exposed, stripped of every defense mechanism he'd relied on for 30 years. Finally, Shanice called for the vote. "Same rules as last week. Majority decides. Mark steps outside while we deliberate." Mark walked into the parking lot on shaking legs. The afternoon sun was harsh, making him squint. He sat on a concrete barrier and put his head in his hands, replaying every answer he'd given, every moment where he might have revealed himself as still performing rather than changing. 15 minutes passed, then 20. Through the window, Mark could see animated discussion, women standing to make points, others responding with equal intensity. This wasn't a simple yes or no. This was a real debate about whether he'd earned their trust. At 30 minutes, Shanice emerged. Her face was unreadable. "They want you to come back in," she said. Mark followed her inside. The women had rearranged their chairs into a tighter circle. Gloria gestured to an empty seat. "Sit." Mark sat, his heart hammering against his ribs. "We've voted," Gloria said. 13-2 in favor of letting you continue. The 2 against weren't because they think you're lying. They just don't think you've done enough work yet to be useful to us. That's fair? I happen to disagree, but I respect their position. Relief flooded through Mark, so intense it almost hurt. Thank you, I won't... We're not done, Gloria interrupted. There are conditions. You work with us, you follow our rules. First, you don't get to stay in hotels when you're here. You stay with one of us. You see how we actually live. You eat what we eat. You deal with what we deal with. No tourist experience. Mark blinked. Yes. Okay. Second, you don't just show up for our sessions. You work alongside us. You help clean houses, prepare food, make deliveries, whatever our businesses require. You're not an advisor who floats above the work. You're part of the work. Understood. Third, every time you slip into old patterns, and you will, we call it out, immediately. No softening it, no protecting your feelings. You wanted accountability? That's what it looks like. I accept that. Gloria glanced around the circle, receiving nods from the other women. All right then. Welcome to the program, Mark Calder. Try not to make us regret this. The next week in Atlanta went similarly, though Marcus Thompson added his own conditions. Mark would attend community events, eat at local restaurants, shop at neighborhood stores. You want to serve these communities? You better actually know them, Marcus said. Not as a sociological study, as a person who lives in the world. The Brooklyn program was the hardest. Keisha Monroe made Mark present his confession to a group that included several people who'd lost jobs or opportunities because of executives like him, people who'd been judged and dismissed by the system Mark had benefited from. One man stood up halfway through and walked out, unable to listen to another wealthy person talk about learning lessons. Keisha let him go without comment. He doesn't owe you his time, she said simply. None of us do. The vote there was closer, 8-7. But it was enough. Over the next 6 months, Mark lived in the homes of strangers who became colleagues, who became friends. He scrubbed toilets alongside Gloria's cleaning crews, learning that the work he'd never noticed was backbreaking and skilled and essential. He helped Keisha prepare meals for her catering business, discovering that running a commercial kitchen required logistics as complex as any corporate operation he'd managed. He spent a week helping Marcus's entrepreneurs navigate city permit offices, experiencing firsthand the bureaucratic maze that people without connections had to navigate alone. He failed constantly. Called a business plan ambitious in a way that sounded condescending. Suggested a strategy that revealed he'd forgotten this entrepreneur couldn't just hire a team to execute it. Got frustrated with a permit delay and said, "This is ridiculous," only to be reminded that ridiculous was the daily reality for people without his former advantages. Each time someone called him out. Each time he apologized, examined his thinking, tried to do better. The work was exhausting and humbling and nothing like the triumphant redemption arc he'd imagined. There were no headlines about his transformation, no media coverage of his good works, just quiet, hard, often invisible labor that helped people gain small incremental advantages in systems designed to exclude them. In month 4, Carlos's food truck finally launched. Mark was there for opening day, serving alongside Carlos, watching a line form around the block. When a customer recognized Mark and asked for a selfie, Carlos stepped in smoothly. "He's working right now. Maybe come back during his break." The customer left. Carlos caught Mark's eye. "You're not a celebrity here. You're staff. Remember that." "Thank you," Mark said quietly. "Don't thank me. Just keep being useful." In month 5, Mark received an unexpected email from Lydia. The divorce had been finalized months earlier, their communication reduced to brief exchanges through lawyers. But this email was different, personal, and it carried a weight that made Mark read it 3 times before responding. "I saw an article about your work with the accelerator programs. It made me think about the gala, about who we were. I want you to know I'm not doing any of the work you're doing. I'm not rebuilding or changing or becoming better. I'm just surviving in Connecticut, spending my settlement and trying to forget. But I wanted to tell you, what you're doing matters. It doesn't erase what we did, but it matters anyway. I hope you keep doing it." Mark sat with that email for a long time before responding with a simple, "Thank you for writing. I hope you find your own path forward. You deserve that chance too." He never heard from her again. Some bridges, once burned, couldn't be rebuilt. That was part of the accounting too. In month 6, Ethan requested a meeting. They met at the same coffee shop in Brooklyn where this had all begun. And Mark realized with a start that exactly 6 months had passed since he'd sat in this chair terrified and uncertain about everything. "Tell me about the work," Ethan said without preamble. Mark thought about Gloria and Carlos and Keisha and the dozens of other entrepreneurs he'd worked alongside. About the businesses that had launched and the ones that had failed. About the lessons he'd learned and the ones he was still learning. "It's hard," Mark said finally. "Harder than running a corporation. Because it's not about me. It's about getting out of the way while still being useful, and I'm still learning how to do that." "Are you still measuring yourself by what you lost?" Mark smiled slightly. "Gloria asked me something similar. The answer is yes, sometimes, but less than before. I'm starting to understand that useful isn't a demotion from important. It's just a different kind of valuable, maybe a better kind." "That's growth," Ethan said quietly. "Real growth, not performance." "Does that mean I passed your test?" "This wasn't a test. It was an opportunity. You're passing or failing every day based on choices you make. Some days you pass. Some days you don't." Ethan finished his coffee. "I'm offering you a permanent position. Same work, same pay. Expanded to 6 cities instead of 3. More entrepreneurs. More complexity. More chances to fail and learn and be useful." Mark felt something warm expand in his chest. Not pride exactly. Something quieter. Something that felt like purpose. "I accept. There's one more thing." Ethan pulled out a folder. "I'm restructuring how my firm operates. I want to bring in people who've been on both sides, success and failure, power and powerlessness. People who understand that perspective matters. I'd like you to join the advisory board. Help us decide which programs to fund, which cities to expand into, how to make this work sustainable long term." Mark stared at him. "You're giving me power again." "I'm giving you responsibility." "There's a difference. Power is about authority over others. Responsibility is about service to them. You'll be accountable to the entrepreneurs we serve, not the other way around. Think you can handle that?" Mark thought about Gloria's question, about whether he could stay at ground level if given the option to climb. This wasn't climbing back to where he'd been. This was building something new at ground level, something that kept him connected to the people doing the actual work. "I think so," Mark said. "But I'm going to need people who'll call me out when I slip. People who won't let me forget where I came from and what I learned losing it. That's why the board includes 5 entrepreneurs from the programs we fund. They have equal vote with the investors. Your vote doesn't count more than theirs, ever." Ethan extended his hand. "So what do you say? Ready to keep being useful?" Mark shook his hand, feeling calluses that matched his own now, earned through months of actual work instead of symbolic gestures. "Yes. And Ethan, thank you for destroying me when I needed to be destroyed, for giving me the chance to rebuild into something better." "You destroyed yourself. I just removed the scaffolding hiding the damage." Ethan smiled slightly. "But you're welcome for the chance. Don't waste it." They left the coffee shop together, walking out into Brooklyn morning traffic, 2 men who'd met as adversaries and were learning to be something like colleagues. Ethan headed toward the subway. Mark watched him disappear into the crowd, this man who'd changed his entire life with one phone call and a refusal to tolerate casual cruelty. Mark's phone buzzed. A text from Gloria. "We're launching the website today. Can you help troubleshoot before it goes live?" He texted back immediately. "On my way." As Mark walked toward the subway station, he passed a young man in a worn jacket sitting on the sidewalk with a sign asking for help. 6 months ago, Mark would have walked past without seeing him. Now he stopped, pulled out his wallet, and handed over a $20 bill along with one of Patricia's business cards. "If you're trying to get back on your feet, this program might be able to help," Mark said. "No promises. But they're good people who give real chances." The young man looked at the card, then at Mark, something wary but hopeful in his eyes. "You work with them?" "I do. I also know what it's like to lose everything and have to rebuild. It's possible. Hard, but possible." "Thanks, man." Mark continued to the subway, descended into the crowded station, and squeezed into a packed train heading toward Gloria's neighborhood. He stood pressed between other passengers, holding the overhead rail. Just another person commuting to work that mattered to someone, even if it wouldn't make headlines. His reflection in the dark window across from him showed a man who looked tired, older, more worn than the CEO who'd stood on a platform 6 months ago celebrating triumph. But this reflection also showed someone who'd learned to look at people instead of past them, someone who measured worth by character instead of wealth, someone who was learning, slowly and imperfectly, how to be useful instead of important. Mark pulled out his phone and opened his notes app, adding to a list he'd been keeping since his first session with Gloria's group. Useful isn't a demotion. Service isn't punishment. Ground level is where real life happens. Stay here. Remember this. Don't climb back up. The train stopped at his station. Mark emerged into sunlight and walked 3 blocks to Gloria's office, a converted storefront where 5 women were gathered around a laptop, trying to figure out why their website kept crashing. They looked up when he entered, and Gloria waved him over. There he is, our technical expert who actually knows how to fix things. Mark rolled up his sleeves and joined them at the laptop, shoulder to shoulder with people who'd given him a chance he didn't deserve and were helping him become someone who might eventually earn it. Outside, the city continued its rhythm. People working, struggling, building, failing, trying again. Inside, 6 people crowded around a computer screen solving a problem together. Their worth measured not by what they'd lost or gained, but by what they could contribute to making something work. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't impressive. It wouldn't restore Mark's reputation or rebuild his empire, but it was real. It was honest. And it was exactly where he needed to be. The website launched an hour later. Gloria's phone started ringing almost immediately with inquiries from potential clients. The women cheered, embracing each other, celebrating this milestone that represented months of work and risk and faith that their service was valuable. Mark stood slightly apart, watching them, and felt something he hadn't felt since long before the Cromwell Grand. He felt like he belonged, not because he was important, but because he'd finally learned how to be useful. That night, Mark returned to his small apartment and found a package waiting at his door. No return address. Inside was a simple card with 4 words in Ethan's handwriting: "Keep doing the work." Underneath was a framed photo of Carlos's food truck on opening day. Mark visible in the background serving customers, completely focused on the work. No performance for cameras. No awareness of being watched. Just someone being useful. Mark hung the photo on his wall, the only decoration in the apartment besides a calendar and a contact list for the entrepreneurs he served. Then he sat at his small table and opened his laptop, reviewing business plans for next week's sessions in Atlanta, making notes on strategies and connections that might help, thinking about how to be useful without being controlling. The man who'd thrown wine on someone for looking poor was gone. The man who'd built an empire on believing success made him superior was gone. In their place was someone still learning, still failing, still trying to understand what it meant to treat everyone with dignity regardless of what they could do for him. That man had a long way to go, but at least he was finally walking in the right direction. Mark closed his laptop and looked at the photo on his wall one more time. In it, he was nobody special, just someone doing work that mattered. And for the first time in 30 years, that felt like enough. The city hummed outside his window, full of people whose names he'd never know, whose struggles he'd never fully understand, whose dignity he'd finally learned to recognize. Mark turned off the light and went to bed, ready to wake up tomorrow and do the work again. Not for redemption, not for forgiveness. Just because the work needed doing, and he was finally capable of doing it without needing to be the hero. In a quiet office downtown, Ethan Cross received a notification that the 6-month evaluation reports had been filed. He opened Mark Calder's file and read assessments from Gloria, Marcus, Keisha, and 24 entrepreneurs. The consensus was clear: difficult at first, prone to old patterns, but genuinely trying, making real progress, being useful more often than not. Ethan smiled slightly, closed the file, and moved on to the next evaluation. He'd given Mark Calder a chance because someone had once given him one. The cycle continued. That's how systems changed, not through grand gestures, but through thousands of small decisions to see people clearly and give them room to become better. One phone call, one withdrawn deal, one man forced to confront who he'd become. And now, 6 months later, the beginning of actual transformation. Not perfect, not complete, but real. And that was enough to build on.